The experiential is what gets me every single time. I mean, it's why my co-host Adam and I started the Fluff and Hammer, the Warhammer podcast that we
Yeah.
do, and it was because there are literally tons of Games Workshop podcasts out there. There are hundreds of them, and many of them are very good. I mean, there are some that are absolutely hilarious. There's a British couple called Snipe and Wib, and they do these incredibly irreverent, funny sort of looks back on Games Workshop's history. They're incredibly funny, but the vast majority are kind of technical.
Sure.
They're a little
Yeah.
dry, they're about like always looking at the latest release and just going through page by page the new books and the new rules and all that kind of thing. And that's just not my jam. It's not our jam. We're not interested in that. So we wanted to
No.
fill a niche, with the Fluff and Hammer. We wanted to make, like the title says, it's fluff. We
Yeah.
wanted to go for the fluff rather than the crunch. So we invite people on and ask them stuff like, so how did you get into the hobby? And
Yeah.
how do you respond to it? What do you enjoy about it? That's what we like.
Yeah, that's same for me. I mean, I could listen to what I've also found is when I'm listening to a podcast, a pop culture podcast, and it's
Hmm.
people talking about a particular franchise, whether it's
Hmm.
a film or a game or a cartoon or whatever. If it's people talking about their personal experience and they're talking about it with passion,
Yeah,
it doesn't actually matter if it's something I'm into or not. So not just reeling off facts, but talking about why they love it and everything.
yeah.
It doesn't actually matter if I like the thing they're talking about.
Right, right.
So, like, to start with, you'll always pick the episodes that are a topic you're into, like, oh, I
Hmm.
like Batman or I like Ghostbusters or whatever. But then I just end up listening to them talk about any topic.
Yeah.
And if they're doing it with passion,
Hmm.
then I just really enjoy it. And I've found myself listening to subjects about which I have, in principle, no interest in at all.
Right.
But because they talk about it in such a way that it is so passionate. Like I listened to one recently, and they were talking about Euro '96, which was a football tournament in the '90s
Right,
that was hosted
right.
in England. And I specifically remember that because it was in England, and there was a
Uh,
lot of stuff. But a lot of what they were talking. I mean, I'm not into football, I'm not into sports, so I don't follow it. But
yeah.
I was surprised how much of what they were talking about I remembered with regards to why that tournament was different and why
Right. So like
it and everything.
culturally and all that kind
Yeah,
of thing.
because they were saying there was like a really bizarre sense of like good sportsmanship about it.
Hmm.
Like there was no riots and there was no fights, and
Hmm.
there were like fans of every stripe and country celebrating together in pubs and just enjoying the game. Like it's
As
fucking meant
it's
to
as it's
be.
supposed to
You
be.
know,
Yeah,
and it just
absolutely.
there was a whole culture of just good naturedness about the
Yeah.
whole thing, and I remember that. I really remember that going on, even though I wasn't part of it.
Uh-huh.
I, I, I've forgotten how much of that I could then say. Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
And
I
it
find
was
that
like a
I find
yeah,
exactly the same thing, and it can even lead on to you finding new things to be interested in, It can
sure, yeah,
introduce things to you. I watch a lot of Let's Plays, I kind of like video game Let's Plays, but I'm a bit picky.
yeah,
There's this whole thing with video game Let's Plays where there are a few very prominent people on YouTube that do it, very prominent indeed. And then there are lots of pretenders. There are lots of people who aren't necessarily that great at it, but try to emulate those
yeah,
Let's Players, not really understanding why they work. Or,
yeah.
but the ones who are very good at what they do, I find I can listen to them talk about video games that I have no interest in whatsoever. Like, not
Absolutely,
the
yeah,
slightest interest whatsoever. I mean, a really good example. There's a British YouTuber who really looks at some of the more neglected areas of video game culture called Kim Justice, and she's amazing. She's superb, actually. Her documentaries on the the sort of the heyday of the British microcomputers, stuff like the Sinclair Spectrum and
sure,
the
yeah,
BBC micros, the Commodore Amiga, amazing. It's so interesting because it's something that like we would have grown up with through that era.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but to see under the hood, to see what was actually happening culturally, like the bedroom coder phenomenon. that came
Yes,
about.
absolutely. That kind of went away once you got to Nintendos
Of
and Segas
course.
and stuff, didn't
Well,
it? Yeah,
yeah, it just died, but it was huge. It was
yeah,
enormous in this country. You actually had like people, literally kids in high school who were just very good at coding. You know, they were very good at coding. They were often socially isolated, very kind of awkward people, often people with autism, who were just very good at what they did and became millionaires overnight because they
yeah.
coded video games that sold like enormous amounts.
Yeah, because if you've got a console where it's not only here's a very simple video game that we've
Mhm.
sold you, but also you can look under the hood and see exactly how
Right,
that's made,
right.
and you can emulate it yourself with the same
Mm,
software that's included.
right.
You can make your own, can't you?
Yeah, she goes into the history of all this stuff, and it's honestly fascinating. Like normally, I would not be interested in stuff like boardroom calisthenics and like the business side of things. I would find that so deathly dull. But honestly,
Sure.
it's fascinating because it's so dramatic. There's stuff happening behind the scenes with some of these computer companies that are unbelievable.
I always find that interesting with listening about films and stuff though. Like some of the films that you watch that seem like such a tight ship that
Hmm.
everything works so smoothly and it's beautiful. The production journey of it was a
Oh, oh,
nightmare.
tell me about it. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of old Hollywood. I
Yes.
love the stories of old Hollywood.
Oh
And
yeah,
one of
yeah.
my favorite things on earth, one of my favorite subjects is the feud between Betty Davis and Joan Crawford.
Yes, sure.
Oh my God, it's at least as good as many of the films they made together, you know?
They should have made a film of that. They
Well,
could they could cast
actually,
some really good actresses in it.
funnily enough, there is a great series out there called Feud.
Right.
And you've got Susan Sarandon as Betty Davis. Um, and who is it who plays Joan Crawford? It's Jessica Lange who plays
Oh really?
Joan
Okay.
Crawford. And it's a series. You can get it on Amazon at the moment. It is honestly fantastic. It is so good. If anything, they downplay how terrible they were to one another.
Right, okay.
Because honestly, reading about it, when I've read books about this feud, the shit they did to one another is unbelievable.
Yeah, it
It's
was that, old Hollywood was very sort of ego driven and even more
oh,
so than now, isn't it,
you
really?
wouldn't believe. I mean, also, I mean, the other thing, the other side of it is what the studios did to them. Because, of course, the whole system was different back then. The studios effectively owned their actors. You had certain
Yeah.
actors who were licensed, which is another way of
Yeah,
saying
which is why you get like 50 films made and same lead actor in them. And,
exactly,
whether or not he were good for that part is irrelevant.
exactly
He'd,
that.
he'd be the lead.
But
Yeah.
the shit the studios did to them was unbelievable. I mean, the studios, Warner, like Warner Brothers, as they were back then, is the reason why that feud erupted, and because it made for good cinema.
I bet it did, yeah.
Well, you
Yeah.
watch. Like, have you ever seen Whatever Happened to Baby Jane?
Yes. Yeah.
That was the big one. That was the big one. That and the studios, while they were making that film, the studios were constantly just saying to the guy who directed it, make them fight,
Yeah.
keep it going, keep this
Because it comes
feud
out on screen and people are watching for
right.
evidence of it on screen. And
Exactly. It
yeah.
smolders on the screen and you can see it. Like in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, that is basically like a fictional version of their relationship, you know?
Sure, yeah.
It's amazing. I love that shit. Rudolph Valentino is another one. Rudolph Valentino, the stuff about him that didn't come out until long after he died.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Like it's stuff that if a movie star he did it today, well, for one thing, they'd probably be arrested, but they'd also be like set, just excoriated, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Unbelievable.
people get taken off of films because of something they tweeted 15 years ago
Mm.
now, so you're never going to get scandals like that again.
Oh, it's but like the parties that he had, the
Yeah,
accounts of the parties that he had that lasted for weeks, literally for weeks, where you would have like all the hangers-on just sprawled over his palatial manners, like high on everything imaginable. You'd have like because he had menageries of wild animals. So you'd have
of
like
course they did.
you'd have tigers and things wandering around and peacocks and it's unbelievable. You
Well,
read it and you're like, if
it's
you
just that
wrote
level of
this,
opulence, isn't it? That
yeah.
even with like your biggest Hollywood stars with the fanciest Bel Air mansions and stuff, they don't have shit like that
it
going on
it
now.
just doesn't no it just doesn't happen, not like that, not like that. I mean it's obviously very dark as well. It's I mean
Oh, of course it is. There's got to be like a distaste for like a willingness to use and abuse people, which is
well,
not quite as culturally
almost
accepted now.
almost every actress from that era got to where they were because the studio executives basically coerced them into sex, you know.
Yeah, I can
it,
imagine that. Yeah.
there was mass rape, essentially, of any like actress you can name from that era. They were raped by one of the studio executives. You can guarantee it. The child stars like the stuff about Judy Garland, the stuff they did to Judy Garland is unfucking believable.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hideous.
It's just like I think it's those people, particularly in the era that it was,
Hmm.
who get to this position of power and wealth
Hmm.
where it's not just that they think they can do whatever they want; they actually
They
can. The
actually
system is
could.
set up so
Yeah.
they can do whatever they want.
Hmm. Yeah, it's true. It's
And
absolutely right.
it's not like I mean, even people talk about Weinstein, but when it was found out about him, he suffered the consequences. But you're talking about an era where there would be no consequences.
Just none. No. The people, for the most part, the people who did that shit, they went to their graves fat and wealthy and
Yeah,
fine, you know, which makes it even more grotesque, doesn't it? You know.
yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Um,
the whole industry was set up to just allow these guys to do whatever they wanted, wasn't
yeah,
it? So,
absolutely it was, and obviously it was always the guys. You know, obviously it was a man's world, if you like. You
yeah.
know. Um, don't get me wrong. I mean, some of those women were awful. I mean, Joan Crawford was a terrible woman. Betty Davis was a terrible woman as well. But they were also victims, you know.
This is something that I think sometimes people kind of forget about when it comes to stuff. There was a film out a couple of years ago. Charlize Theron played. It was in it. It was about that scandal at Fox News where the boss had been like coercing a lot of the
Yes,
women there
yeah.
into. I can't remember the name of the film.
I
But the point I was
know,
going to make. Do you know which one I mean?
I know the one you mean. I can't think off the top of my head of what it was called.
It's very
Um,
good, but
yeah.
what that exposed and focused on is something which I was just about to say. Where you were saying that these women were terrible people,
Hmm.
what I was going to say is that that doesn't actually matter when
No,
it comes to somebody doing this. It
no, of
doesn't
course it
make it.
doesn't.
Oh, it's not as bad because they were, a
No,
terrible person.
of
But
course it
but
doesn't.
I think sometimes the internet forgets that shit.
Hmm.
And what that's kind of something they touched upon in this film is that they were saying that like the media, the liberal side of the media and Twitter and stuff didn't react to this as strongly because these women were Republican Fox News reporters.
Right,
And
right.
if they'd been liberal left wing reporters, it'd have been, oh
Hmm.
my God. But
Hmm.
because it's like the enemy, quote
Right,
unquote,
right.
it wasn't spoken about as strongly. And I think there is a shade of that on Twitter.
Definitely there is. I mean, there is. The internet loves binary, doesn't it? It
Yes,
loves
you have a goodie
binary.
or a baddie. So if this person's a Republican, they must automatically a baddie. So it's not as bad if something's happened to them at
Well, I
work.
mean, prime example, you're seeing it right now, today, with like Meghan Markle and Harry. Now,
Yeah.
I have no truck with the royals at all. I
No.
think the entire institution is corrupt. I think it's moribund. I think it's emblematic of a sickness,
Yeah.
and I think it's inherently abusive, you know.
Of course
So
it is.
like
Yeah.
when Harry and Meghan were married, they swept up all of the homeless people from around the area and just shoved them away
Of
basically.
course it did. Yeah.
That said, it doesn't matter. My feelings on the royal family, and even on like Meghan and Harry specifically, which are not that strong one way or the other, does not in any way legitimize the abuse that those two are suffering right
No.
now.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't matter whether you think, like if you hear a woman has been sexually assaulted in the
Mhm.
workplace, whether or not she's a nice person is
It just
irrelevant.
right,
She can
right.
be a saint, or she can be the most horrendous bitch you've ever
It's
encountered in your life, and
yeah,
it doesn't matter.
no,
It's irrelevant to what's
it's
happened.
totally irrelevant. You look at the situation in and of itself, you know.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
take things back to Aurelian principles, Marcus Aurelius, look at each thing in and of itself, yeah?
Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
Uh,
I just think that. with regards to a lot of the stuff that comes out, like with the Fox News film,
Yeah.
I still can't remember the name of it.
I can't either, bizarrely.
There was that kind of focused on that, like
Hmm.
how why is nobody else picking up this story? Why aren't
Hmm.
people talking about this? And it's because these women are Republican.
Yeah, I mean, you also have to look at the culture in which they're operating. I mean, that kind of culture and political climate is going to be full of men who are, sorry, rapists.
Oh yeah,
Of course it
yeah,
is, because they think women are objects. They think women are
yeah.
cattle, you know? It is going to be full of men like that. And I've no doubt there are scandals waiting in the wings, you know? I've no doubt, much worse.
Yeah, I mean, there's the at least now that like the wider culture doesn't accept it. I think that's a
Mm,
difference as well in the sense that like in the 40s, like the classic golden Hollywood
hmm.
sort of era, I don't think the wider public would have responded to that particularly badly.
But they
You know,
wouldn't have
like hearing that a
even.
woman had been, had been basically coerced into sex in order to get a film in
Not
a
at
film
all.
role. I don't think the
Well,
wider public would have necessarily been horrified by that.
well, as awful as this sounds, look at what that culture was like. It was a rape
Yeah,
culture. I'm
yeah,
sorry, almost every woman alive in that era would have been at least sexually abused in some way. You know,
yeah. Just the way they were spoken
it
to and
was
everything really is just
it's the way it was, as awful as that is. I mean, like, I speak to women of like my mother's generation, and
yeah,
the vast majority of them were exposed to things that we now would definitely call sexual assault, you know, because
yeah,
that was just like how it was the culture and the way it operated, as disgusting as that is. And I think often what you're getting with a lot of these older misogynist men who are railing against like feminism and whatnot is that they feel called out. You
yeah.
know, they don't like the fact that, oh, now suddenly they have to, they're being called on their bullshit. They're being called upon their rapine natures, and maybe some
But
of them
I don't
feel.
think it's necessarily specifically for these sort of guys, like
Mm,
those particular sort of big, big powerful executive
hmm.
type dudes. I don't think it's specifically the fact that they're being told they can't do that. I think
Hmm.
they would respond like that to being told they couldn't do anything.
You're absolutely 100% correct. Yeah, it's true. They are people who've never been told no, aren't they?
Exactly. I don't think it's particularly about what do you mean I can't smack my secretary on arse? I
Right.
don't think they're particularly attached to that. If you said to them you can't when they were told they couldn't smoke in the office, I bet
Hmm.
they responded the same way.
Well, you're seeing it now with things within the COVID-19 era, aren't you? Seeing it
Oh
like
yeah.
like Peter Hitchens. Peter Hitchens is like one of the arch examples of this, where he's like
Yeah.
railing against having to wear masks and whatnot.
The most minor
Right.
inconvenience, and it's like,
But
how dare you put this upon me?
but
And yeah,
that man is not only of a generation, but also of a class that has never been told no.
yeah,
He's from a privileged white background, went to Oxford, has never had to worry about money, you know, never in his life has he had to worry about money, and has never been told no. Suddenly, there's a situation where he's got no fucking choice, you
yeah,
know? And suddenly he becomes like the arch saint of the anti-COVID crowd, you know?
yeah, yeah.
It's unbelievable. It's so I find it repugnant. I find it repulsive. Um, and you see it on Twitter as well, you know, if you call him out, he will respond to you. He's done it a couple of times to me, and it's like a petulant child.
Has he got nothing better to do?
Right. This is the point I make. Like, I'm a nobody. You know, I'm a nobody
Yeah,
on Twitter, and yet you respond to me for pointing out this
I never
particular
understand
hypocrisy, you know?
why. I never understand why rich and famous people of any stripe,
Hmm.
whatever industry they're in, why are they on Twitter? I don't
Yeah.
see the point. You know, like you'd like a classic example of this is J.K. Rowling, right?
Hmm.
So, someone who has made, she's got what you would call fuck
Right.
you money. She can do
Yeah.
whatever she wants. It don't matter. She sees that the world's values are going a certain way that
Yeah.
she doesn't agree with.
Right.
Why talk about it? Why talk about it publicly? Why let
Well.
everyone in on the fact that you're a transphobic knobhead? Why just not
Well.
just keep it to yourself and
Right.
enjoy your big piles of
It's
money? You
because
know,
she's got
why
an
do you have
agenda. She's got an
just
agenda,
shut
hasn't
up.
she?
Why get you to just shut? If you've got views like that,
Right.
and you're rich, just shut up. You don't need to be on
Yeah.
Twitter.
It's true, but she's got an agenda. That's
It's ego.
obvious now.
That's just
Yeah.
absolute ego.
I
Everyone's got
mean,
to listen to me.
I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt when I first started hearing about this, because I had no idea, I had no idea for the longest time. And then I started hearing like these, I was like, that maybe, I mean, maybe she's just got wrong information, maybe she hasn't like really, maybe she's being fed a bad line about, about trans issues and whatnot. So,
Mm.
but when you start looking back into her background, you're sort of like, holy fuck, no, she's like full on frothing at the mouth transphobe,
Yeah, yeah, it's fair.
And
You start seeing it the more the pattern
the thing,
emerges.
you know
Yeah,
what got me? It's the thing with her pseudonym, Dr. Robert Gilbranth.
yeah,
And someone pointed out to me, do you know who Dr. Robert Gilbranth was? And I was like, no. And they said he was a 19th century eugenicist who's founded the conversion therapy phenomena. This notion of like
yeah.
changing gay people into straight and all that
There's
bullshit.
no way that's an accident.
No.
There's
And
no way
and
the
the
only way I would believe
fact.
that was an accident is with somebody. Do you know, like there was that? It's a random reference, but it's apt for this. There was an episode of Friends where Joey was trying to come up with a stage name, and
Yeah.
Chandler suggests Joe Stalin, and because he's so dumb, he
Yeah.
just goes with it because
Yeah.
he doesn't know who that is.
Right.
In that sort of a situation, but there's no way she is that poorly educated
Well,
that she doesn't. You know?
given that this Dr. Robert Gilbranth, aka J.K. Rowling, writes books about a trans serial killer,
Yes, the most recent one. Yeah, I heard
I'm
that.
like, fuck off,
No, that's
Joan.
not a coincidence, is it?
Fuck you, Joan.
Such a random name as well, is it? It's
Right.
not like, oh, I called myself John Smith and there was a
Right.
paedophile called John Smith.
Right.
It's not like.
That's exactly it. If it were just like I could buy it was a coincidence. If it was just like a normal name.
Yeah.
If it was
But
a
that's very
common
specific,
name.
isn't it?
Oh, it's so specific, and it's like, no, there is a real like problem there.
Yeah.
And you know what I feel more than anything, it's not entirely anger, although I do feel that it's more sadness, because this is a woman with an enormous platform who
Yeah.
has sway over the imaginations of young people, and I'm like, you could be using your platform for such good. You could be like inspiring younger people to be anti-authoritarian, to not accept the prejudices and bigotries of their forefathers and whatnot. And this is the hill you choose to die on.
Yeah, but that's what I mean, is that if she doesn't have positive views about this, why say anything? Just shut up.
But
Just
it
why
is.
do you have to promote that poison? I don't get it.
But it's funny how often that happens, isn't it? I mean, you've got Graham Linehan, who went down the
Yeah.
same road, who's now. I mean, that makes me incredibly sad because, I loved Father Ted. I like everybody.
Everybody loves Father Ted.
It's great.
Yeah,
It is.
everybody
It's
loves
so
Father Ted.
fun. It's so funny. But you know what? It's starting to fade, and very soon it won't be what he's remembered for.
No.
He'll be remembered for his transphobic tweets and the
Yeah.
fact that he's so obsessive about it that he poses as like trans women on message boards trying to. So,
It's
oh
unbelievably
my gosh.
pathetic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just, what is wrong with you? Why are
Right.
you? I don't get it. I just don't get the impetus to make such a spectacle of your hatred, and I don't get it.
I don't
get it at all.
For me, there's got to be something deeper and darker going on there. There's got to be some sort of neurosis, and I don't know what that is. I don't buy into the psychology that every homophobe is secretly gay or anything. That's just a simplification.
I think that's a bit childish to think that.
But there's with Graham Linehan, there's something. I don't know what it is. I don't know whether he was like, I don't know whether he had an encounter with a trans person at some point or what. I don't know.
No, but I've never understood that when it comes to isms as well. Like, if I meet a black guy and he turns out to be a prick, I just assume that guy was a prick.
Yeah.
It's not because he's black.
Right.
It doesn't make me think that every black person is a prick. No. And it's the same if you have a negative encounter with a trans person, that means that particular trans person was a dick. It doesn't mean that everyone is.
Absolutely.
I don't get get that
absolutely.
logic that people have at all.
What it demonstrates is that the prejudice is kind of pre-existing, or the
Yeah.
inclination towards prejudice is
And that's just
pre-existing,
sort of you
isn't it?
using that as your
It's
excuse
the
then, aren't you?
excuse. Yeah, it's absolutely the excuse. Because quite frankly, almost every single one of us, say if you are white and English, every single one of us has myriad examples of white English guys and women who are complete pricks. You
Yeah.
know? Um, it's a fascinating phenomenon that's happening right now. What I say about J.K. Rowling is she's basically become the British Orson Scott Card. You know, the guy who wrote Ender's Game. I mean,
Yeah.
he's a ferocious homophobe. And I mean, like, he writes long, massive screeds about how homosexuals are kind of like undermining the bedrock of
Oh
civilization. And
God.
oh yeah, he's a right nasty piece of work. He is. Um,
But he's going to be known for that now
mm,
rather than the books he wrote. And I think
right.
J.K. Rowling's already in danger of tipping over
Oh,
that
I
the more
think
time goes on. Because
yeah.
Harry Potter, I know they keep milking it with films, but
Mm,
basically Harry Potter's done and
it's
gone now.
the phenomena is done, isn't it?
It's gone.
Yeah.
Um, but yet she's still out there spreading the bullshit that she speaks about
Hmm.
stuff. So that is going to end up being a longer part of her legacy
It's
than the
true.
Harry Potter stuff.
It's absolutely true. The people I do really feel sorry for are like the trans people who found some outlet or meaning through Harry Potter, and there are lots of
Oh
them.
yeah, there'll be a lot of fans from it. Yeah, because it's all to do with. There's a subtext there that if you wanted to, you could take as that
Hmm.
about being in a situation where your family doesn't appreciate what you
Hmm.
are and who you are, and you're finding a place where that can come out and where you can
Right.
be the real you with other people who are like that, and that you know, if you wanted to see sort of queer subtext in
Yeah,
Harry Potter,
totally.
it's there. But then find out that the author thinks that about
Mm.
you.
Yeah. It's a difficult thing, isn't it? It is a difficult thing. I mean, this is where the notion of the death of the author comes in, isn't it? You know, um, I mean, generally speaking, the death of the author is very poorly understood as a concept in popular parlance. It's very poorly understood. People do take it to mean that you have to separate the text from the author, or the authorial intention is finite. But it's actually far more complex than that. But on a colloquial level, yeah, absolutely. If you find something in the text that is good, that is positive, if you could take something positive from it, do it.
Yeah,
Do it, because you're making something good out of something bad, you know. And that
yeah.
ambiguity, actually,
You
I
can grow a
find,
flower out of a pot of shit. So,
yeah, absolutely. I
you
mean,
know,
and personally, I find that ambiguity to be actually a very interesting tension. So, I mean, for both of us, obviously, Lovecraft.
yeah. Oh, of course,
Lovecraft
yeah,
is
yeah,
is is the perennial example of this. So, you know, in many respects, Lovecraft was an absolutely terrible man, and that stuff, all of the bigotry, the prejudice, the fear, the anxiety, all of it comes out in his work. It's absolutely there. But at the same time, intermingled with that is such incredible vision and such transcendent metaphysics, and taking that positive from the work is, I think, a very adult thing. I think it's a very enlightened thing to do. I
yeah.
find,
I think it's necessary as well.
yeah,
Otherwise, you're gonna have like empty bookshelves and
exactly.
empty,
Well,
you
this is
know,
this is
yeah.
another thing. If you started to throw out all of the books by people who are problematic, well, that's Edgar Allan
It's
Poe.
even worse.
You
It's
know,
even worse when you get into music. You'd never listen to rock
right.
music ever again.
Well, no, because it's sad to say the vast majority of the people you probably really like are there instances of really terrible like sexual things in their past? Yeah, definitely.
I always find it interesting what people are gonna overlook
I mean,
with regards to music.
the big
You
one
know,
is
like, go on,
Michael
you
Jackson. Michael Jackson, you know.
that's one. I was gonna say that people always seem to still go on and on about John Lennon, but
Hmm.
overlook the fact that he was a wife beater and used to
Yeah,
beat his kids up.
yeah.
You know, people were very quick and quite rightly so to cancel like the guy from Lost Prophets and that
Hmm.
kind of thing. But
Yep.
they overlook the underage girls backstage at Bowie gigs and that kind of
It's
thing. You
true.
know,
It's absolutely true. I mean,
it's
it's absolutely true. It's one of those things, isn't it? Now, it's it's very difficult for people because I think again people like simplicity, don't they? They like
yeah.
absolute answers. I don't think it's it's definitely not exclusive to the internet age, but the internet age seems to have
It's
exacerbated it.
definitely refined this goodies and baddies black and
Yeah,
white thing, yeah.
yeah, definitely. And
Whereas I think from our era, you were quite, when we grew up and you'd listen to music and you'd be like, oh, I love Rolling Stones. I'm aware that Axl Rose is a complete bellend band.
yes,
Not Rolling Stones, sorry, Guns N' Roses. I'm aware that Axl Rose is a complete bellend, but I still think Appetite for Destruction's brilliant.
yeah,
You were able to have that nuance, weren't
right.
you?
And you can watch things like, for example, the music video to Smooth Criminal,
Yeah,
where he dances like an angel.
yeah,
It's the best dance routine I have ever seen in my life. It is incredible.
yeah,
And that is a thing in and of itself to appreciate.
yeah,
There's also the fact the fairly I you know what, having studied child abusers, which I have to because of my work, if
sure.
he wasn't, it would be a miracle.
It's just so weird. I always
Right.
thought that about him that when he's interviewed and stuff, and when he talk about kids in the
Mm,
police interviews and stuff, that
right.
you just think there's something not right about his relationship
He
with kids.
he
There's something.
demonstrates every characteristic of a classic abuser, I'm sorry to say. Like the way he zeroed in on particular children, a lot of abusers do that. The way
Spoiled
made
families as well.
he made the families dependent on him in
Yeah,
many ways. That is a classic. That is classic. That's
yeah,
how they work. They unveil themselves into family units. Um, yeah, and also the excuses. Oh, they spent time in his bed, but nothing. I'm sorry. How
what? Yeah,
naive do you
what?
have to be? I'm so sorry, but that is just naive.
Yeah,
And denial. I mean, that is denialism, isn't it? It's because people don't like the fact that someone they really liked, whose work they really like, was in many respects a very terrible person, and also a very damaged person.
oh, evidently that was clear. Yeah, there was some serious mental not damage and stuff not right with him.
Well, when you look at his past, I
Yeah,
mean, he was an abused child. He was a phenomenally abused child in almost every conceivable way. His father was an evil son of a bitch.
yeah.
He and also because he was famous so young, he got abuse from the press as well. That's
Of course, yeah,
that's part of what started the whole thing with his appearance.
yeah.
A child in the music industry, children in the music industry are abused in every which way.
It's almost like a cliche, isn't it, that your kid gets a young famous kid, particularly in music industry,
Hmm.
and then they end up going crazy in one way or
Right.
another at some point.
Yeah, it's almost universal. Some of them get out of it. Some of them are really lucky. They have support networks and they get out of it. Mara Wilson is a really good example. The actress who played Matilda and
Yeah,
whatnot. She's really active on Twitter and whatnot. She's brilliant. She's a really interesting lady. She got out of it. She was lucky because her parents were very active and kept her safe from the corrupting effects of like fame and the studio and whatnot. And when she said, "I'm done," they let her be
yeah. I
done.
thought they accepted that she wasn't their meal ticket, which I
Right.
think you get with a lot of them.
But she writes a lot of books and she does exposés on what it's like being a child star and the pressures and
Yeah, I'll bet it's
you know
awful.
yeah well it seems to be it seems to be a terrible thing because it screws them up. It
Yeah.
destroys people. I
It's not
mean,
normal, is it? I
no,
mean, there's no amount of money that would make me want to live that kind of life where you
no.
can't go anywhere without being photographed. You
Oh
can't just nip
my
down to the
God.
shops. You can't. Even now, even worse now with mobile phones and the internet and
Oh,
stuff. I just think, nah, it's not worth the money.
like no, like the Tom Cruise level of fame. It's like no,
Yeah,
thank you. No, where everyone knows what you look like, and no, thanks. I'd
I
rather
mean, I
not.
do think a lot of them. Not that level of fame because obviously Tom Cruise could go anywhere. Tom
Mm.
Cruise could turn up at some like tribe in the middle of
Yeah,
the jungle and they'd know who he
it's
was. Do you know what I mean?
probably true. Yeah.
But I mean, at lower levels of fame,
Mm.
I think there's a lot of that set up.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I got photographed, paparazzi again.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you were going to that nightclub where
Hmm.
all the celebrities go
Yes. Yeah.
in London.
Definitely.
Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? If you just went for a night out in Bristol
Hmm.
to some random nightclub, ain't no one going to be taking your photograph, girl from
Right.
Hollyoaks. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? It's
Yes.
like
Absolutely. Yeah.
you're setting that shit up to get in the papers. To
Yes.
at a lower level, I think you could live a normal life if you wanted
if you
to, but you're
wanted
going
to.
to places where you
Yeah,
know you're going to be spotted.
sort of playing the game a little bit, yeah.
But yeah, once you get up to sort of top levels of it, you can't go anywhere without someone's going to know
It's
that that's
so
who you
damn
are,
dangerous, though,
and
isn't
that's
it?
not
Like,
natural, is it?
no, no, and that anxiety, of always like thinking, oh, what can I do to get? Oh God, ugh, no, thank you.
It's so obvious why so many of them turn to drugs, though,
Yeah, totally. I mean, my
because you're basically a prisoner, aren't you?
well, an ex of mine, Ray, lovely guy. Like we're really good friends now. When I was going out with him, he was on the very edge of becoming rather famous. He was in a band that were getting attention from places like Time Warner and whatnot,
All right, cool.
and he hated it. He hated it. He was saying like
Already, even
they
on the cusp of it.
already, right, they weren't even signed or anything, but they were like, he was saying like they want me to like cut my hair, they want me to lose weight, they want me to dress this way, they want me to say that I'm 10 years younger than I am. Um, and he was like, I can't be dealing with this.
No,
So he didn't go for it in the end. He bowed out. He just could not hack it. He said, I don't want this. I don't want it. And he was saying he's toured before. He's a musician. He's a singer. He's a songwriter, and he's toured before with other bands and singers and whatnot. And he says that culture, you need to be on something. Because you
yeah,
can't hack it, you'd be exhausted the whole time. You need to
it's
be
not
on.
normal. I
No,
know normal's a bad word, but do you know what I mean? It's just not normal for humans to live like
no,
that.
it
You
isn't.
you are supposed to have your own privacy and your own
Hmm.
ability to get away from I mean, that's even why I sort of over the last few years, when I identified that the social media was the
Mm,
cause of a lot of my sort of mental health problems, is
yeah.
that I could step away from it. I
Hmm.
kind of go on it now when I've got something to say.
Yeah.
So if I've got something I want to post about, I'll post it.
Yeah.
If someone tags me or tweet or whatever, if someone tags me in something or comments on something, so there's a notification, then I'll
Right.
go on and see what that is and respond to it. But otherwise, that's it. I don't
Hmm.
scroll. I don't just idly look through it. It's almost
Hmm.
like an email account for me now.
Yeah.
If you've got an email to send, you open up your email and you send the email. If
Hmm.
someone sent you one, you'll open it up and read that and respond to it if you need
Yeah.
to. But otherwise, you don't just scroll through your inbox.
No, I
And
think that's a very healthy thing, to be honest. I think that's very healthy because it's easy to get into these cycles, and I found myself doing it, where you are actively scrolling for something to make you angry, or
yes,
to make
yeah,
you depressed. It's a really perverse thing.
yeah, because
And
you don't stop when you get happy stuff. You
right,
just yeah, that's not what you're after,
I
is it?
think that can be very dark and dangerous. I really do. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do feel that there are forces at work in culture and in the world that really need tackling. They really need tackling, and they need attention on them, like quite urgently, because they are contributing to the decay of everything,
Yeah,
essentially. But there does come a point where you just have to realize that for your own it's live to fight another day. For your
yeah,
own mental health, you just need to step back and stop.
yeah. I agree. Definitely,
It's enough.
definitely.
It's why, I mean, I was talking about this on Twitter earlier today. It's why I stopped arguing with the likes of transphobes and homophobes. I used to do it all the time. That was part of my channel, like way back when. I used to do debates with like, fundamentalist Christians and things like that. And I realized, A, it was pointless.
You can't debate with them.
It was absolutely pointless because the only effect you would have is ambient. It would
Yeah,
be whoever's listening to the discussion would be able to get something from it. But when it comes to the individual you are quote unquote debating, more likely arguing with,
you're just
that
shouting at a wall, aren't you?
it's a waste of time. It's one set of assumptions that are totally incompatible with another, that are antithetical to them.
Yeah,
So there's just no point. You end up just talking past one another. You are never going to get any kind of fruitful discussion out of that. But not only that, there's also my own. There's also because if you're debating things like, for example, homosexuality with a homophobe, you are giving them license. You are
Yeah.
actually giving them territory. And very often, because even now we still exist in a homophobic culture, the assumptions and traditions of culture are inherently homophobic, regardless of what strides we've made, they are inherently homophobic. So what tended to happen was they would come into the debate under the automatic assumption that I was on the defensive, I was on the reactionary, and
That
that's
you
what
have to
would
defend
right.
yourself. You have to defend
And
your existence.
it's so easy to fall into that trap because that's the way culture is set up.
Of course, yeah.
That's the way these debates are framed. And it became very apparent to me that it's the assumption of territory that as though this is their garden, it's their kingdom that I'm trespassing in, that I
Yeah.
have to attack. And the minute you start doing that, the debate's over
Yes.
because they don't like it. They will get really angry when you start saying to them, for example, marriage, oh, it doesn't belong to you. It just fucking doesn't belong to you. And then you start pointing out, like, oh, yeah, because you straights have done a great job with marriage, haven't you?
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
your
It's
70% divorce rate, you've done a great job.
I never understand that. Where these people who claim to be like the moral arbiters of something like Christian sorts usually,
Mm,
and then you look into their past and they've got 7 kids by 7 different women.
right.
You know what I mean?
I know
And you
exactly what
think,
you
oh
mean.
yeah, you're a fine example of this
I know exactly.
Christian virtue. That
There's I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but there's a guy, a very famous gay guy in the US he does a podcast and he writes about like sexual health and positive sexuality and that kind of thing. And he is in an open relationship with his partner, right?
mm,
With his husband, actually. It's an open relationship, and they have very particular parameters in that.
sure.
And I remember him talking about how he got this letter from this very angry person saying, how can you call what you have a marriage? In all of my relationships, it's always only been the one person. And the guy stopped and he said, all of your relationships. Now, how many are we talking here? Because you know what? I've only ever, over the last 20 years, I've only ever had the one relationship, and
Yeah.
that's with my husband. And the same is true of him with me. Now, occasionally, we allow one another to go and have sex with someone else. That's just the way our relationship works. But
Sure.
we are together for the last 20 years. So hang on here. We found a dynamic that works.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
It's probably just
So
because he's gay.
it is.
It's
I mean,
like you can do
underneath
what you
it,
want as long as
yeah,
it's straight and you can still justify it. But as soon
exactly.
as you add 2 guys into it or 2 girls, then
Exactly.
yeah,
Underneath it all, there is this homophobia. There is, it's absolutely true. In the same way that euphemistically, when you look at a lot of the articles in like the right-wing gutter press in the UK, they're very clever about using euphemisms and whatnot, but underneath it, it's fucking racist.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah,
Underneath it, it's the fact they don't like seeing like black faces down at Tesco's, or they don't like the fact that
yeah, yeah.
that's what's underlying it. That's what's underlying it. Euphemistically, that is what is
You see it
underneath.
with the choice of photographs as well, don't you? Like
Hmm.
if, for instance, if a white footballer has been arrested for assaulting
Right.
a girl or something, they'll put a picture of
Yeah.
him at an awards ceremony where he's in a suit and tie and he looks smart and
Absolutely true.
nice smiling face. If it's a black footballer, they'll pick a really aggressive picture of him from the middle
Hmm.
of a football match where he's just going in for the tackle or something and his face is all angry and contorted and they'll
Yep.
pick that one for him. And they
Absolutely
think people
true.
don't notice because most people
Hmm.
don't. Most of their readership are too dumb to
Yep.
notice this.
It's
That's the
true.
thing.
I think it's even the language is different they
Yeah,
use. Even the language is different. They will use the most softened euphemisms
yeah,
if the accusations of rape are against someone who fits the demographic, you know?
yeah,
You know?
absolutely. Yeah,
But if it's the same thing they do with politicians. So for example, if you read in the Daily Mail about the horrors that someone from the Tory party daily commits,
yeah,
they will use the language of, oh, it was a mistake.
yeah.
They will say someone made a mistake, someone made an error, because making an error and being a little bit stupid is better than being
All they
actively
kind of humorise
malicious.
it.
Yeah,
Tory
yeah.
politician caught with his pants down, that kind of thing, as
Hmm.
opposed to this filthy Labour politician doing this with a prostitute, and
Well,
it's
here's the best example I can think of. Priti Patel, right?
yes, oh yeah,
Priti
yeah,
Patel is the most evil woman in our politics at the moment. She's one of the most evil people. The shit she has done
yeah,
is unbelievable. The shit that she says is unbelievable. She lost recently 150,000 documents relating to criminals in the UK, right?
amazing.
Just lost them. Just lost them. And
Can you imagine if that were a
where's the
Corbyn
outrage?
politician? One of
Right, well, this is
Corbyn's
it.
guys.
Diane Abbott, right?
Yeah,
She makes a few mistakes with figures on one broadcast, and they hound her, they pillory her, they basically destroy her. Priti Patel, 150,000 documents related to criminals in the UK. Mm,
yeah.
yeah, well,
Ed Miliband can't eat a sandwich properly. That's
right,
how much attention does that get?
right.
Yeah,
Right, it's true. It's absolutely true. There is this. I mean, I'm getting very fundamentalist about my hatred of the media in the UK at
yeah,
the moment. I've got to say, I think they are the most toxic, poisonous thing
yeah.
at the moment in UK culture. Um, Brexit wouldn't have happened without them.
No, no, of course it wouldn't. No,
It
no,
wouldn't have happened without their filth that they're pumping into culture. It just wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have even been a concept. It
no.
wouldn't have even been a concept without them. But it's beyond that. It's way beyond that. The way they are harassing normal people, the way they vilify normal people, and the way they can destroy lives
Yeah,
so easily with no comeback, no recompense whatsoever. It's so hard to bring libel cases in the UK.
yeah, yeah.
It's so bloody hard. And very often, even when they are bought, it's a piddling amount. It's just a money thing. Nobody's actually fucking charged with
No,
anything.
no. And to industries that make as much money as that, fine's
Right.
negligible. I mean, I read a statement once, which was that for rich people or
Hmm.
institutions, a fine as a legal thing is basically just how much it costs to do what they want to do.
Exactly that. Well, in any fine-based legal system,
Yeah,
it's always against the poor.
yeah.
Of course it is. It's always in the
So like
favour of
that
the
with
rich.
Priti Patel,
Hmm.
an investigation into harassment of colleagues, like through
Right.
bullying and stuff, offered like to over £250,000 to make it go away, and this person took
Exactly.
that. Of course, they took that because the person who was
Right.
offered that probably earns about 18 grand a year. So how are
Yep.
they going to turn down a 350 grand
Right.
settlement? It doesn't mean that they're saying, "Oh, I'm fine with it now, pretty." But honestly,
No.
who do you know who could turn down a settlement like that?
Exactly. Like in any realistic sense.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely
I'd
true.
drop it for that. It doesn't matter
I.
about your morals. I've got a mortgage. I've got. Do
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyone would.
I know exactly what you mean. Like any normal person who's working in a normal situation would think, well, I could use that money for real good. I could
Of
use it to
course they
help my
could.
mum or yeah, it's absolutely true. So the legal system is set up
It's
to
skewed
help to
towards
favour
people
the
who've got the
rich.
money because then they can pay off these settlements and make it go away. And the people
It's
who are
true.
making the charges will accept it because they haven't got that kind of money. So
It's
it's
absolutely true.
completely skewed towards them.
It's absolutely true, and it needs to end. It needs to stop.
Yeah, they should just take fines out of the equation. You don't get a
Yeah,
fine for stuff because it's only skewed towards people who ain't got the money.
right, it's absolutely true. And that isn't going to happen, unfortunately, because most of the people who operate in the legal system are the friends, children, uncles,
Yeah,
aunts of the rich.
yeah.
It's very rare that you get like any kind of high profile solicitor, for example, who is from the working classes. It's
No,
very rare.
yeah, it's very very rare occurrence to see. So there's no representation there for stuff like
No,
that.
and as for like judges and magistrates, that's basically nepotism. You know,
Of course it
you've
is.
just got to
Yeah,
be in the club. You've got to be in the old boys club. There are so few, even, I mean, right now, there are so few women judges. There are so few.
yeah.
It's unbelievable. So, how does that work? You've got male judges deciding on cases like abuse and rape and whatnot, and it's like, you really do need to have some balance here.
Yeah, of course you do. You need to have someone who understands the issue
Hmm.
rather than
Right.
just puts their own opinion on it, which people do whether they want to or not. You don't
Right,
even
you can't
realize that
help
you've
it.
got like unconscious bias towards things.
That's true. It's absolutely
It's like
true. You know,
if it's a race crime, you judge ought to be someone who's of the same sort of racial background
Yeah.
as the person who's the victim, because I can
Yeah.
expect a rich white guy to understand. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? It's,
Who are also, again, they're often quite old.
yeah,
Judges are often quite old, so they are from eras where things like racism and misogyny are kind of baked in.
yeah,
There's a lot. I mean, part I think of what is driving the unsettled nature of culture at the moment is the fact that people are waking up. They're starting to see these injustices. They're starting to see these things that are just assumed as part of culture, as part of tradition, which maybe like previous generations didn't really do anything about because they
sure.
didn't have any vested interest in doing anything about, because they were comfortable. Now it's starting to show.
Yes.
I think the cracks are starting to show, and it is going to result in war of one kind or another. Whether it's just a culture war or whether it's actual violence. I don't know at the moment where it will go. But we've got to be very careful because it's very easy for that situation to go south really quickly and for it to skew hard to the right,
Yeah,
to the
you don't
authoritarian.
ever really want to push towards violence, because the people who
Mm.
have the equipment to do that better are always on the right. The
Yeah, it's
guns are
true.
always in the hands
It's
of the right. So any kind of
yeah,
a civil war, your left ain't gonna win it if it turns into
it's
a full-on
true.
war. So
It's sadly true, and that is really sad.
yeah,
And the worst thing is, I mean, with regards to like the disparity and the escalating disparity between the rich and the poor, I can't think of any other way of ousting them.
no, there would have to be some sort of massive fundamental change in law that actually,
Right.
there was no loopholes in terms of tax
Mm,
and
right.
and things like that. I mean, like the way they get around it with things is like, again, this is a newspaper thing, is like
Hmm.
convincing people that things will affect them when they won't. So,
That's
like
it.
things like inheritance tax, for instance, when
Right.
Labour was talking about increasing the rates of inheritance tax, and
Hmm.
people were like, "Oh, so my parents have worked hard all the life, and then they leave me their house,
Yeah.
and I have to pay half of it." No, you don't, because
No, you
your
don't.
parents will not have a house that's worth £750,000.
Exactly that.
So
But that's the way the right wing gutter press
it's not
skewed
going
it,
to
isn't it?
affect you unless your parents are
Hmm.
leaving you million. Inheritance tax don't kick in until you get over like £500,000. So how
No,
many
you're right.
people's that going to affect, really?
You're right. You also had people like talking about how they didn't want like the Corbyn government, the communist government, from taking the properties that they'd worked hard to build, and
No.
that was nowhere anywhere in the Labour manifesto. All Corbyn's government was going to do is take away some of the abusive rights of landowners.
Yes.
That's all it was going to do. It was going to put a little bit of power in the hands of tenants.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all.
But it's by convincing. It's that thing you see. I must admit, you see a lot of this in America, possibly more so than Britain,
Mm,
where people believe that one day they're going to be a millionaire.
yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, it is so bizarre, isn't it? Where you've got people literally in trailer parks who think Trump is their messiah.
Because one day you don't want to do policies that tax people with 700 million quid, because one day I
Right,
might have 700 million quid.
right.
You know,
But even like, I mean, like the lack of scope in that. Even if you did, what does it matter if you were taxed higher?
you're not going to
It wouldn't
notice it
make.
gone.
I
There's
mean,
genuine
Stephen King
studies on
is
this. There's genuine studies that
right,
after a certain point, you don't notice if you've got any more money or not, and it comes
right.
quicker than you think. It's a
Yeah.
much smaller amount than you think. It's way before
Hmm.
you get to billions. You're talking
Yeah.
like once you've got like 50 million in your account, which is a lot
Hmm.
less than a billion.
It's a lot less than a
Literally,
billion.
someone could take every penny out of your account above that amount, and you wouldn't notice.
Yeah, yeah. Stephen King talks about this all the
Yes, he
time. I
does.
mean,
Yeah.
he's very rich. Obviously, he's very rich, but he's also very left wing, very, very Marxist. And he talks about this all the time. He is constantly like tweeting about how, look, I make ridiculous amounts of money just by sitting on my arse
Yeah.
because all my books have always been in print, right? why am I not taxed?
Yeah.
Why am I not taxed? He's never been. I mean, I think the thing with King is that he was poor.
Yes.
He's been poor, so he knows.
Yeah.
He is aware, you know? He knows what it's like, and he understands that for the most part, if you're born poor, you die poor, you know?
Yeah.
For the
Yeah.
most part.
It's very difficult to break out of that. You've just got to get supremely lucky, like he did. I'm
Yeah.
not saying he's talented, because of course he is,
No,
but there's a
no.
lot of luck involved.
But he says that himself.
Yeah.
He is so aware of this. He says, like, you've read On Writing, you
Yes,
know?
of course, yeah.
Where he says in that, like, if I were not writing at the time I were writing, when there was just this boom for this
Yeah.
kind of material, where there was like this efflorescence of small publishing houses happening, where there was just a cultural climate where my kind of fiction was what was wanted, then I wouldn't have been anyone. Also, the fact that like his breakout work he threw away, you know,
Yeah.
Carrie he threw away, and Tabitha, his wife, took it out of the trash and submitted
Of
it
course,
under
yeah.
his name, you know? Were it not for that, who knows?
Yeah, there's so much luck. This self-made thing is always bollocks,
Oh, it's
because now
bullshit.
there's always
It's
someone who's taken a chance on you. There's always someone who's
yeah,
helped you out, or
yeah.
you know, the
It's a
idea that
bullshit myth.
anyone pulls herself up, it's nonsense. I'm not saying you don't have to
It's
work hard. Of course you have, but
no,
it's never entirely you. That's not
no.
never true.
The myth of the self-made man is one of the most pernicious in all of culture. It is total, absolute, complete bullshit.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
It just doesn't happen. It just does not happen. And yet our newspapers and whatnot are constantly pushing it into culture. How many times do you see the article where it's like, oh, 18-year-old becomes property magnate because
yeah.
they bought... And then you read the article and they say, oh, yes, we had to work very hard for it. I mean, our dad lent us 30 grand for the first property. And it's like, well, fuck off
Or
then.
something like, oh, this businessman who's now a billionaire started his own company and you know with on his own back or whatever, and you're like,
Hmm.
yeah, and his dad gave him 500 grand.
Exactly.
You know, it's
Exactly.
not
And
quite starting from
it's
nothing, is
not
it?
quite the same. And even in instances where someone was poor and made, ultimately millions of pounds, they always had help along the way. Often, very often, people like that, they had to step on a lot of throats to get
Oh
there.
yeah,
They had to stab a lot of backs. You look at Richard Branson's past, he's a fucking wanker. He's an evil man, he is. He's a fucking, basically a cannibal, you know? Evil man. But the thing is, you don't get to be someone like Richard Branson without being a bastard.
no,
You
no.
just don't. You have to. The amount of like bankruptcies and people who are left
I
destitute in
was going to
his
say the
wake.
amount of people you have to be willing to screw over to stand on the
Yeah,
back so you can get a bit higher. It's
right.
yeah,
You just don't get there without it. And even if you didn't, even if that were not true, if you are not operating in the cultural climate where what you provide, is going to catch,
yeah.
then
That's pure luck. You
sucks.
can have written, I mean, about writing. You can have written the
Yeah.
best damn book about, I don't know, the American Civil War, for instance, that's ever
Hmm.
been written. But if no one's bothered about them at the moment,
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly
and you
this.
can't control that. You don't know what
No,
you can't control the zeitgeist at that time. You
no,
you write what you want to write, and it's either
that's
popular or
it.
it's not.
That's it. It either catches or it doesn't, and that's the end of it. People respond to it or they don't. That's just the way it is, isn't it?
Yeah,
And I think it's the mark of a healthy creator when you realize that. It's just sort of like, well, it frees you up in a way, doesn't it? Because it's just like, well, I'm just going to keep
just
doing
keep
it and
doing
throwing
it.
shit
Yeah,
out there, and who knows, maybe it'll catch someday. Um, but yeah, I find the whole phenomenon amazing. The myths, the cultural myths that we cleave to
yeah.
as though they are holy, and they're so paper thin. They're so paper thin that with all it requires is an instant's critical thought,
Yes.
and they just become whole cloth.
Well,
They're
you just
just
add an
like,
extra fact to it usually.
yeah,
Like the example we give there, you talk about, oh, Jeff Bezos started Amazon on his own back in a garage, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but
mm-hmm,
his dad gave him 300 grand. You just
yeah,
add that one extra sentence
mm-hmm,
and suddenly it falls
that's
apart,
it.
doesn't it?
Elon Musk is one of them.
And his
People often
parents own
hold it.
diamond mines.
They own
You know
diamond
what I mean?
mines. It's
Like,
like,
let's just add that bit of info in, shall we?
how can people believe this?
Yeah. You just need to add that. There's usually just one sentence that you can throw in there, and it completely shatters the house of cards.
It's so true. But what I do love, I mean, it may sound that we're being negative on this podcast, but the thing is, all we're doing is describing the situation. That's
It
what
is what it
is, you
is.
know.
It's not negative or positive. Facts are just facts. I
But
can't, you
what
know.
what I will say, Lex, is that not less than 10 years ago, people would not have been having these conversations on this level.
No.
Not like this, not popularly. We would not have been aware of this.
No.
So the fact that we are, and the fact that people are noticing, they're seeing the grifts, they're seeing the injustices, they're seeing the disparity, that can only be good.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, there's definitely kind of that people are starting to see behind the curtain there.
Yep.
And
They
they're
are.
starting to see, hang on, that's not actually a big floating head, is it? They're starting to see that.
Oh my God, The Wizard of Oz. I like the Wizard of Oz reference because that kind of leads
Well,
on
I
to
was
what we're
just
talking
thinking
about
that as
in
I
a
said
weird
it.
kind
I
of
always
way.
use that reference behind the curtain. It's such a great analogy.
Oh, it's
Such a
perfect,
great
isn't
analogy
it?
for
It's
seeing. I
perfect.
use it a lot when I'm talking because I've been, as you know, and you are largely responsible for this. I've been speaking about the fact that I'm autistic publicly for the
Yeah,
first time this year,
of
and I've
course.
wrote quite a few sort of like not quite an article, but I've written like quite
But
lengthy posts and stuff about it.
the responses have been great, haven't they?
Yeah, people have been lovely, really lovely, both in private and in messages and responses and stuff. Which I've had a lot of people email me and stuff, and it's been really lovely.
It's been really good. I've been reading through them, and the amount of people who like found out themselves.
Oh yeah, I've got. I mean, it's not for me to say who they are, but I've had three
No, of
separate
course.
friends who, on the back of me talking about this stuff, have looked into it themselves and ended up with their own diagnosis as well.
Right.
Which is
Amazing.
kind of why I wanted
Amazing.
to do it because not because let's have everyone autistic. I don't mean that, but I
Yeah,
mean just if it helps anybody, that's the point.
exactly.
If anyone else can read it and think, "Shit, that sounds like me," and then they look
Yeah.
into it, and that's the point. So and
Yeah,
the fact that he's done
totally.
that is great. But what I was going to say is that this phrase "seen behind the curtain" is something I say a lot as an autistic person because
Right.
I kind of have these. I can always see behind the curtain. I can always see
Yeah.
through bullshit. So
It's
when you
kind of
get
transparent, isn't
yeah,
it, for
when you
you?
get some, the other analogy I use is the sunglasses from They Live, where he
Yeah.
puts them on and
Yeah.
he can see the fact that these people are aliens and stuff. And
Yeah.
it's if someone's got that superficial charm or someone's that kind of thing, I can always see straight through it. I can just see that this is bullshit. This isn't
Yeah.
genuine.
The
And
kind of like narcissist's charm or
yeah,
the
and
grifter's charm.
it's like with a salesman or whatever. I'm like, just stop it, stop it.
Yeah.
You're not my friend. You're not going to sell me a more
Just.
expensive car than I want. I want that one I came in for. Fucking give it me. Then I'm
Yeah.
leaving. That's
Yeah.
can't be doing with any of that. Any of that schmoozy. Let's be charming. Let's be mates. No. I can see through it. You're not working it on me.
Yeah, the game,
Yeah,
essentially,
don't
the
play it
pantomime.
with me because I can see what you're doing. I can see the strings. I can see
Yeah.
exactly what's happening here. But other people can't. So when
No,
I
it's
point
true.
it out, they think I'm the bad guy then. So it's
Yeah,
quite difficult.
it's called. They call it shoot the messenger syndrome, and
Yes,
it's
I bet they
so
do. It's
pervasive.
perfect. Yeah, and
It's so
it's like
pervasive.
oh, if you've got any friends who have like spectacularly bad taste in men, which unfortunately I do, and I'm like,
Oh boy,
I'll tell you
yeah, I've
now,
got quite a few.
don't go out with that guy. But then 2 years later, it's like, oh, he cheated on me with my sister. It's like I could have told you that when you
Yeah,
picked him up and he was holding a can of Monster Energy and had his baseball cap on backwards. But
yeah,
there we go.
but yeah, I know so well, but yeah, I mean, I've learned to just keep my big mouth shut, to be honest,
You
because
just have to because people think you're the bad guy. You just have to.
yeah, yeah, it never ends well.
But that
It
phrase,
never ends
leading on
well.
to Wizard of Oz, it's been seen behind the curtain, is such a brilliant cultural analogy because everyone
It
knows
is.
exactly what you mean.
It is perfect, isn't it? Even people who've never seen the film
You still get
understand
it.
what you
You
mean.
get
Yeah, or
exactly what it means because it's where you are being presented with something and everybody is presented with the same and everyone buys it. But then one person looks and goes, hang on, that's
yeah,
bollocks. That's not actually what's the real thing here. Look, there's a man stood here behind this curtain. And
yeah,
that
yeah.
leads on to what we were going to be talking about, which is we always come up with these topics that don't have a quick, abbreviated
They don't,
explanation,
do they?
but
I mean, and they're kind of like nebulous. You know what I mean? So, I mean, we intended to talk about children's films or children's media that have a sort of a
darkness
horror
edge to
element
them,
or
which
a
is
certain
very,
darkness
very
to
much of
them.
the 80s. You get a lot of these in the
Yeah.
80s, and they kind of died away in the 90s.
Yeah, and then came back in a big way.
Yeah,
Like there's, I mean, it's something. I mean, when you look back into the roots of children's media, it's always there. There's always a certain undercurrent of darkness in children's fiction,
sure.
which I imagine relates to where they often derive from, which is of course our oral traditions, our fairy
Yeah.
tales and whatnot, which are dark. They're phenomenally dark. I mean, you must have read some of the original
I
fairy
love the original
tales.
fairy tales. I've got a book that was my grandmother's, which was German, and it's got the
Mm.
English translation
Ah,
afterwards because my grandma
the
was German.
German
So,
fairy
oh, they're
tales, they're
great.
so
Everyone just died.
dark.
Everyone just died
Yeah, they're
horribly
so friggin'
because the
dark,
morals
aren't
of
they?
German fairy tales are very different. It's basically like
Yes.
they got told not to go into that scary wood. They did it anyway, and they fucking
Hmm.
died. That's that's
Yeah.
that's the moral. Do as you're
German
told.
fairy tales, man. They are so dark. Russian fairy
Oh
tales are
yeah.
the same, but Russian fairy tales are dark in a different way.
Yes.
It's not like everyone dies in Russian folk tales. In Russian folk tales, it's more that there's a cruel irony.
Yeah.
There's a fate that occurs to the main character that's usually a cruel irony. I mean, the one I always think of, my favorite fairy tale of all time, is the Russian folk tale of The Soldier and Death.
I don't think I know that one.
Oh, it's about a Russian soldier who he comes by through many odd, strange adventures. He comes by a magic sack, which whenever he calls something into the sack, it has to obey.
Okay.
So he uses it to catch geese and things like
Sure.
that. But at one point in the story, he gets deathly ill, and he
Right.
has the notion of capturing death
So he
in
can't
his
die,
sack.
right? Yeah.
Right, and it
Was
works.
this the inspiration for the Sandman, Neil Gaiman's
It's
book? Because that's
it's
kind of
you
what
know
that
what
cult do at the beginning, except they
this
get it
it
wrong.
the yeah, the story is pretty much derived from this. Yeah,
Okay.
it's pretty much derived from this. But what he finds initially, it's all celebration because suddenly nobody's dying.
Of course.
Nobody's dying. However, it becomes apparent that the world needs
Of course
death.
it does.
There are the story describes star-crossed lovers who fling themselves over cliffs and then have to walk back home
Yeah.
because they don't die.
Yeah.
After a day's carnage with wars and battles, both sides would just go home confused.
Yeah. Nothing to
So in the
grow either.
end, exactly.
Yeah.
In the end, he has to release Death, and he does. However, Death is afraid of him and runs away, won't take him, won't set the world to rights. And the soldier drags himself through the ages of the earth until he can't stand it anymore. And he drags himself to the gates of hell and they won't have him. He drags himself to the gates of heaven and they won't have him. And in the end, all he can do is wander forever. It's
Right.
really sad. It's so sad and beautiful, and I love
That's
that
very
story.
Russian. That just kind of
Yeah,
constant bleak, constantly
yeah,
bleak. Yeah.
yeah. What I find with the German folk tales is they're more
Oh
aggressively
yeah.
nasty.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You told you not to go in that wood, but you did. So there you
Mm,
go. You got ripped apart by a wolf. So you're happy.
yeah.
Yeah.
My favorite one of the German ones is Hans my Hedgehog.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I love that story so much. It is so pretty and so dark and sad. I love it to bits. I love it to. It's such a good story. That's another one from the Grimm fairy tales,
Yes,
by
of
the way.
course. Yeah. Well,
Definitely want to go and read that.
something like that with what I was going to say about what we started to mention Wizard of Oz is one of these
Mm.
films that feels, I think, even more fairy tale than the original is Return to Oz.
Oh bloody hell! If there was ever an emblem of this subject,
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's others I wanted to touch upon, but we'll do this one first. It's
oh my
so.
god,
I'd even describe it. It's so dark.
Da-
It's so
there's
weird.
something
And
there's
who was
something
it
about that
for? It was made
film,
like 50 years after the original. Who was the
right?
audience for this?
Well, I mean that's true even of the tone, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
so even like when it starts and like Dorothy is being treated for
Yeah,
psychosis
she's in a mental hospital because she's talked about her journey to Oz and everyone
because
thinks she's
right.
nuts. Yeah.
It's dark and
It's
it's
electrolysis
weird
as well, isn't it? She's getting like,
right.
yeah,
There's like electric shock therapy in this thing. It's so dark. And when she does eventually escape and get to Oz, Oz is this dangerous, dark, horrible place. So she emerges in this place called the Deadly Desert.
yeah,
And the thing about the Deadly Desert is anyone who touches the sand turns to sand.
yeah.
It's
Which
grim
makes you
and
think how
weird
much of
and
that desert is just corpses.
right, right.
You know,
And
was it
as you
just like a
watch it,
small puddle of sand to start with, and then
right, the way the film is framed as well, it is often framed like a horror film.
yeah, very much so, very much
It
so. Like the Gnome
there's
King, he's
oh
like made out of stone, but he becomes increasingly more human. The more, what
yeah,
does
the
he do? I
stop
can't remember
motion.
what he does to become more human.
It's basically he sets Dorothy a challenge, and he has turned all of her friends into ornaments in this
She
chamber
has to
adjacent
find
to
one,
his.
doesn't she?
She has to basically find the ornaments that are her friends and say Oz while she's touching them, and that will restore them. But every time she gets it wrong, it feeds his humanity. It basically turns him more human. So he goes from being this really creepy, like stop motion thing to being an actor
Yes.
in makeup. But Dorothy does cotton on that ultimately it's green objects. People from Oz turn into green objects when they're cursed. So she finds all the green objects and starts turning them back into their normal forms. But as she's doing that, whatever essence the Gnome King sapped from them starts to bleed from him, and he starts to become more stop motion and more
Yeah.
scary and big. And that sequence when like all the gnomes, the creatures in the walls are kind of flowing and reach. Oh god, it's horrible.
And then you've got the wheelies, which are like some sort of Clive Barker bullshit, aren't they?
Right, right.
They
People
look
remember the
awful. They look like they've
wheelers.
had
Yeah,
the wheels surgically attached where their hands and feet should be. They just look like they're in pain constantly.
yeah. Man, this film. Every sequence has got a horror element. Mumby, do you remember Mumby?
Yeah, yeah,
The witch who's got like Mumby is the witch who is currently ruling over what remains of the Emerald City, and she's got these heads, these severed heads in
she takes them
caskets.
off, doesn't she, and swaps them
Yeah,
with other. She's like, if she finds a beautiful woman or girl, she like cuts her head off
yeah,
and keeps it in her collection to put on like a
yeah.
different wig, basically.
And you see her doing it. You see her actually like taking her heads off and putting on a new. It's creepy as hell.
Yeah, and then doesn't she want Dorothy's for her collection? I think she
Yes,
does,
she's.
doesn't she?
I think she comments at what because it's Firuza Balk,
Yes,
isn't it,
it
who
is.
plays
Yeah,
very young Firuza Balk, before she did her turn in The Craft,
yeah.
where bloody hell, wow. There's a moment where Mumby sort of takes Dorothy by the chin and says, "You have a kind of plain beauty about you." Um, my God, is it creepy?
But yeah, but
Every
even and then
moment.
there's even the good guys because like isn't like there's a pumpkin head, isn't there? There's like
That's
a
right, Jack
yeah, yeah.
Pumpkinhead, yeah. Jack Pumpkinhead, yeah, who is a scarecrow. He's an
Yeah,
animated scarecrow, but not like the previous scarecrow.
he's
He's a
in it though, isn't
really
he? But he's the only one of the original sort of three characters who's
that's
there.
right. He turns up at the end, yeah. He
But what
turns up
happened?
at
Do you
the
ever find
end.
out why the other two, the Lion and the Tin Man, aren't in it? Is that mentioned?
I think the lion does turn up, but only like very briefly. You see the lion very briefly at the end in the Emerald City, but he doesn't talk. It's like a blink and you'll miss it
Right.
moment.
Because yeah, the
Um,
tone is vastly different from the original film.
oh yeah, it's not
Everything about it.
it is not a sequel to the original film. It's actually much closer to the
Yeah,
books.
it is. Yeah.
This one, it is much closer to the books.
But like the fact that that was very much made as this is a children's film, and yet when
Yeah,
you watch it,
but
that is exactly the sort of thing we're talking about. Is that
yeah,
you would not get that as a kids' film now,
well, people were traumatized by that film. Most of
understandably.
like if you talk to like our generation about that film, that you get this like oh reaction where
Yeah.
it's like oh I remember that, oh it was so scary. It's the same thing you get with Watership Down.
Yes.
The same reaction. Um, that film, what the blue fuck is going on with that film? It, I mean, the book. Have you read Watership Down?
I think we did at school. I think we did at
Mm.
school. Yeah.
I mean, first of all, it's hard to read because you need to keep going back to the glossary at the
Yeah.
end because the rabbits have their own language
Oh
for
yeah.
everything,
That
and it
sounds
doesn't
familiar
tell
now.
you
Yeah.
it doesn't tell you in the story like when they're talking about this particular thing and it's a fox, or this particular thing and it's a
Do you think
cat,
they have a glossary for Smurf books?
Yeah, well,
Just the word
actually,
Smurf means a million different things.
yeah, Smurf everything
Yeah.
basically. Um, but my God, that film,
It's dark, isn't it? Very. Even the colour palette of
really,
it, everything about it.
yeah.
Yeah.
The themes of the story are, it's all about like extinction and desperation and conflict and how sometimes it's necessary to move on,
Yeah.
and how like conservatism sitting in one place will get you killed.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But like
It's not a
graphically,
kid's funny animal story, you know.
no, no. At the beginning when Fiverr, there's this little rabbit in Watership Town named Fiverr, and Fiverr has these like psychic visions, so he sees the future.
Sure.
When Fiverr is having his visions of what is going to happen to the Warren, and you're seeing all of these rabbits like packed into these choked warrens and their eyes are glazing over and the teeth of the diggers and the JCBs are digging down and ripping them up. It's like, oh my God,
Yeah,
who made this film?
it's really. I don't know why it almost seems like you say, why did they decide to do this as a cartoon? Because particularly in that
Right,
era, making something as a cartoon suggests that it's for kids.
right. And don't get me wrong, it's a great film.
It is, yeah, but it's
It's
very bizarre. Like, imagine sitting down
it's
to watch that at 6 years
disturbing.
old or whatever.
It's disturbing. Like the bit towards the end when your hero rabbits are in a war with another warren of rabbits, and the viciousness of the fights between the rabbits, where you see them like goring one another with their back legs and ripping, and there's blood and
Yeah.
there's guts and there's wow. It's horrific. The film is horrific.
Is it worse than when the wind blows?
No. People on this channel, they know about When the Wind Blows. Kit and I talked to Laura Marrow about this,
Yeah,
and
it's bad, isn't it? That film. I hadn't seen it for years. I remember watching
right.
it at school as part of media studies, and we discussed it a lot. But I haven't watched it since then. But it was on about 3 years ago on the one at Sky Channel, Sky Arts, I think. So I watched it, and it just feels depressed for
I
days.
tell you what, I rewatched it for the first time for that podcast, and I bought the book as well. The
Yeah,
Raymond Briggs book, and read it, and it it did for me.
yeah,
I'm like, it's amazing. It's the one of the most amazing pieces of animation I've ever seen because it does its job so well. I never want to see that film
no,
again.
I'll be quite happy not watching it again now. To be honest,
It's it's so dark. It's so horrific. It gets me. It gets me every time.
yeah,
And
it's
again, it was. I mean, it's a Raymond Briggs, so it was marketed to children.
yeah, it's cartoon again. You get
Yeah,
something that's a cartoon, that's what you're going to think it is. And it looks
that's
like
what
the
you.
snowman and the
All
Father
right.
Christmas cartoon and the
And the
yeah,
two main characters, they're everybody's nan and granddad.
yeah.
They're deliberately drawn, and the way they act, they are everybody's nan and
They're in
granddad.
it actually. They're in the Father Christmas one.
They
There's a
are.
scene where you
They
see them,
are.
which suggests that this is the same universe.
Oh my God. I can't. You know what? The Father Christmas one is the only Raymond Briggs one that doesn't have a note of darkness in it.
Yeah, because the snowman's
It's
bleak, isn't it?
Oh, well, Raymond Briggs was always brilliant at introducing children to dark themes,
Yeah,
to necessary life lessons. So the snowman is all about loss,
yeah.
It's teaching you about loss. And I mean, that's another one, actually. The snowman, the ending note of the snowman, where he comes outside and the snowman has melted and it pans away and the music starts and the titles start to go every time.
Yeah.
Every time I'm just in bits. I'm in bits. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It teaches children about loss. You know what I love about Raymond Briggs' stuff? It allows children to feel it.
Someone One of the best compliments I've ever had as a writer is someone compared my children's book, The Old One on the Sea, they said the tone of it reminded them of The Snowman,
Well, that's beautiful, isn't it? I
which is
mean, I
that's a
couldn't.
compliment. Yeah.
That's a massive compliment because you know what Raymond Briggs does, which I think is so beautiful. He doesn't say to children, "No, you can't feel
No,
this. No, children don't feel that. Oh, this is damaging to children." No, he wants you to feel the loss and the despair and
in his review of it, Jim McLeod spoke quite a lot on that book about how it handles grief for children
yeah.
and stuff, and the subject of loss and everything. And it is obviously a part of my story, but it's not something I put
Mm,
a lot of thought into. But I like that other people take things from it that you
right.
don't necessarily put in there,
The,
and you know,
absolutely.
but yeah, the snowman. By the very nature of it, you know from the outset that this is not
Of
going to be a
course.
lifelong friend. This is going to be
Of
like
course.
the equivalent of like a summer romance, if you like. You
Yeah.
know, it's
Yeah.
this is only going to end one way right from the beginning, and this kid's going to have to
Yes.
deal with that. And
And there are undertones because the boy is obviously quite a lonely little boy.
yeah,
He lives with his mother and his father and his dog, I think, and his cat, but he's in the middle of nowhere. The house is in the middle of nowhere, and there are no other children around. It it's very sad.
he grows up to be David Bowie, though.
He does grow up to be David Bowie, which is yeah, that's the version I always because there are two versions
Yeah,
of it.
there's
You know,
one
the
where he does
earlier
it
one,
himself, isn't there?
right? The earlier one doesn't have David Bowie in it.
Yeah.
That was added later on, and that's the one I know. Um, I don't know. Maybe I responded to David Bowie a bit differently because
Well, on that
well,
subject,
he's
another one of
hot
them
anyway.
films is Labyrinth, where
I was hoping you'd get onto it. I mean,
it's a
the
kids' film, but there's some really
but
dark stuff in that film.
well, there's not just dark stuff. That is a horny film. I'm
Oh
telling you,
yeah,
that is a go to horny jail film. Well, what's it about when you look at it? It's about sexual awakening.
yeah.
It's actually a fairy tale about not just sexual awakening, but that is so part of it. I mean, Jareth, the Goblin King, David Bowie, in the tightest of tight pants,
I dressed as him
is
for an 80s party that we
right.
did, and the first thing anybody asked me when we spoke about
Mm,
that was, "Are you gonna have like a crotch stuff?"
well, have you spoken to women about this film?
Oh yeah, no, not just women. Quite a few of my gay friends have
Yeah,
said
yeah,
that was the first time,
yeah.
the first film they watched.
It's
Where when you're about
yeah.
8 and 9, and you're
Mhm.
not quite sexually at puberty, but you'll see something and you think, "Oh, hello,"
Yeah.
and there's something
You're
stirs which you
right.
can't put a name on yet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally. Yeah, it's that for me. That's what it was. That Bowie in that film is sex. He is just amazing.
for me, it
He's
was
beautiful.
the daughter in the Flash Gordon film when she was chained up.
Oh, Aura,
Yeah, when she got chained up and
Aura.
that, and I'm like, I don't know why
Well,
I like this, but I do.
this is another thing. I mean, I talked to Kit. Kit and I did Flash Gordon on What the Hell Is Wrong with Us, and we
Yeah.
talked about like what a weirdly horny film
Oh, it's
that
just it's
is.
like it's inches away from being a porn parody of itself.
Yeah, yeah. It so is. It so is. I mean, she is like just a sexualized
Yeah,
character,
she
isn't
is.
she?
But I just remember just that thing, like exactly what you're saying about Bowie. You're too young
Yeah,
for it to be sexual. You're too young
and
for
yet,
any physical reaction. But
hmm
something inside of you
yeah,
just goes like, oh,
it
and you
responds.
don't know what it is, you don't know
hmm
what to do with that yet, but
Yeah,
something there
I
responds to it. And yeah, I think for
I
Bowie in
can.
Labyrinth, a lot of people
Yeah,
say that.
yeah. A lot of my gay friends, like me, the sequence. It's the Belle et la Bête scene.
Yeah,
It's the ballroom scene. Oh, the outfit, the hair, the mask. He is. When I get to that sequence, I'm like, what is wrong with you? To the girl, I'm sort of like, what is wrong with you? Just say yes.
just take it, yeah, have the
Go,
baby, who
just
cares?
surrender,
Yeah,
surrender. I mean, it's not. I mean, I don't want to simplify the film. Labyrinth is dark in a whole host of
yeah,
ways.
it
It's a
is.
growing up film. I mean, what Jareth, the Goblin King, represents is the dark side of her imagination. So he is burgeoning sexuality. He's kind of the fear and the fascination of men, but he's also imagination unbound. He's the
It's the
imagination that will
abdication of any real
indulge.
world responsibilities, isn't it, as well?
Exactly that. Because
Pure
he offers her
pleasure.
that, doesn't he? He offers her that.
Yeah.
At the end, he offers her that deal. It's like, love me, do as I say, and I will be your slave. I will give you everything you want.
Yeah.
Everything you've ever dreamed of. You will basically be the goddess of your own imaginary world. I will make that happen. But it's about her. It's a powerfully feminist film as well, because it's about her taking control of
Yeah.
that. You know, the final line, you have no power over me.
Do you think it all happens or not? It's very
No.
ambiguous about it, isn't it?
It's massively ambiguous. I mean, it's one of those films where it actually blends dreams, fantasies, and reality really beautifully, and also doesn't answer it.
No, because she never says, "Oh, am I dreaming?" or anything.
Nope.
She just accepts what's going on.
That's right. That's right. So it doesn't, and I love that. I love the fact that it doesn't have to spell it out for the audience. It just leaves it ambiguous. It's like the answer is yes. Of
Yeah.
course, the answer is yes. It's both happening and not happening, and it's both reality and a dream.
But like the puppets aren't particularly cutesy. It's
Well, there's a
the
darkness to
puppets are
it.
quite unfriendly looking, and everything's
Yeah.
aged and got like a sadness to it, and you know, like Hoggle just looks really sad,
Yeah.
and
Well,
Ludo does. They're not like cutesy friendly Muppets.
no, and that's part of the theme, isn't it? The whole thing, all the way through, the criticism of Sarah is that she takes too much for granted. She assumes too much. And these things that she's been imagining that, oh, she thinks are cutesy and nice. No, the fairy bites her.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, that's a
I
very good
love
point.
that.
Yeah,
That's a dark theme too. Isn't that a complex theme to be in a children's film?
very. Yeah, yeah,
Because it's not like it's the ambiguity of imagination. It celebrates it to the nth degree. It really does. But it also shows you the darkness of it and the potential neurosis of dreams and fantasies. It's very clever. And even Bowie as Jareth is this powerfully ambiguous figure.
yeah.
On the one hand, attractive, seductive, beautiful, charming. On the other, dark,
He's very cold and dismissive.
dominating.
You know for a fact that after about a week he'd be bored of you and onto something else.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, he's got some wonderful lines as
Yeah,
well.
he
Like
does.
he's
Yeah.
also a teacher, though. I mean, he's also a teacher, so he's kind of teaching her things, about herself, about who she is. It's like she constantly says throughout, "It's not fair."
Yeah.
She says it's not, which is the child's refrain,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's the child's refrain. And he says to her at one point, "You say that so often. I wonder what your basis for comparison is."
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's his ambiguity is wonderful because you never know, is he like trying to dominate her? Is he trying to take her over? Like, or is he teaching her? Is he leading her to the point where she can take control for herself and take power over her own imagination? It's wonderful. But those themes of sexuality, I love that that's in a children's film. I love that that's in a young person's film. Because how many bits of media have the bravery and the wherewithal to acknowledge that young people do experience these things?
Yeah, you wouldn't get any kind of subtle reference to burgeoning sexuality in a film now that was aimed at kids. They wouldn't
I don't
do
know.
it.
In some stuff you do, like the She-Ra cartoon,
Well,
the
yeah,
Netflix She-Ra
all right.
cartoon.
But I mean,
That does.
I don't know if that was pushed at kids though.
Yeah, that's a
Everyone I
fair
know
point.
watches it is like
yeah,
20 or older. So
that's a fair point. That's a fair point. But some shows do. Stuff like Adventure Time has some ribald sexual
yeah,
stuff
Steven
in it.
Universe as well. I think
Steven
touches on that. Yeah,
Universe.
but
Yeah,
again, these are
definitely.
cartoons. It's like to make a big budget live action film that's going to be in the
Yeah.
cinema. I just can't see that now. I
No,
just can't.
I think on that scale, I think you're probably right because there's too many pressures acting on it, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think you're probably right there. But I Labyrinth
For a girl
is,
as well. Because it
Yeah.
were quite common to do it with a boy's sexuality, like
Yeah.
the 12-year-old lads peeking in window at the neighbour girl getting undressed or whatever. You know, that's
Yeah.
really common trope. But to have
That-
a girl who's about 14 and that's unusual.
Very unusual indeed. I mean, even now that's unusual.
Yeah.
For it to be like at that time in the 1980s, for a girl to be the protagonist, the lead in a fantasy film,
Yeah.
that just didn't happen.
No, it didn't, and they didn't, and they did it in a way that I like, which is also quite rare now. Is that they didn't make her like super special and amazing.
No, oh God, if anything, she's kind of
She's very flawed.
she's very flawed. She's kind of hateful at the beginning, isn't she?
she,
You
but I mean,
know, she's a bit of a brat. You
she doesn't
know.
have any. I don't mean this negative at all, as I'll have to elaborate on this point. But she doesn't have anything special about her.
Not really.
She's not the smartest girl in school or the best at
No.
gymnastics or the best. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you quite often, if they go with a female protagonist in something now,
Yeah.
they have to make her super special and amazing in
Yeah.
some way. She's the chosen one. She's this. She's so
Yes,
powerful. She's
it's
better than
true.
all the men. But it's like, you know what? It's okay to have a female character who's kind of mediocre because
And kind of an oddball as well,
there's,
because like when the film opens, she's doing this really weird thing.
she's
She's
doing a
like,
play on her own.
yeah, to the dog,
Yeah,
and she's like out in public, all dressed up,
yeah.
and it's odd.
She's at
It's a
that weird
strange
point
thing.
where she's well, it's a perfect analogy for the film, but where she's
Yeah.
almost at the point where she's into boys and stuff, but then she still wants to play fantasy and you know.
That's it. Yeah, it's all about the cusp, isn't it? The
But
film is
having her as
all
this
about the edge.
exactly, it's exactly where that film takes place. It wouldn't work if she was 18, and it wouldn't
No.
work if she was 10. She has to
No.
be the age that she's at. But the fact that she herself is kind of just sort of a mediocre person is great because there's plenty of films where the bloke's just mediocre. I mean, in the earlier ones, not so much in the later ones, but like John McCain's just a mediocre bloke. He's not like some hard talented, muscle bound. You know, he's just Bruce
Yeah,
Willis in a
yeah.
vest. He's like, you know. But if it's okay to have a male character who's just perfectly middle of the road, you can have female characters like that. But
Well,
people
it's
seem
more
afraid of
realistic,
that.
isn't it? It's more identifiable,
Very
surely,
much,
you
yeah.
know.
Yeah, because she's not,
And
oh, look at her doing 15 backflips in a row. You know, she's.
no, right, and I'm sure, like, female audiences, certainly of the era, will watch Sarah having arguments with her parents and being a bit petulant about it, and recognize that. They'll recognize that exact situation. Even the words she uses, I can't do anything right, can I?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, she's perfectly relatable, and her she's a normal teenager and she's a normal person that age, and she does step up to her responsibilities, but then she's still hesitant and she's still tempted by things, and it's all very realistic. It's all done through this weird sort of metaphysical journey, but her reactions to things seem very real, and how when she is almost tempted, and then you know, she believes in people because they're nice to her, but then they turn out to be dicks. That's very apt about being a teenager, isn't it? And
well, even like the fantasies she has are very redolent. Like, you know, I always come back to the Belle et la Bête scene, but I've spoken to women, and when they were on the cusp of their puberty and when they were going through their sexual awakening, they were like, yeah, I would have fantasies and dreams exactly like that.
About a ballroom sort of thing.
Like the ballroom where you are, like the lost belle, and then, you know, the smouldering stranger and all of that kind of thing. And suddenly you become the center of it all.
Of course.
You know?
And there's the scene with I don't know the name of the character, but there's that kind of hag who's offering her all. Like,
I don't think she has a name, but like the trash witch.
She's like offering her all stuff from her childhood to try and it's like almost like luring her back to the safety of before you were sexually awakened, and that's a very strong metaphor.
Yeah, it is. And of course what Sarah has to do is break it down.
Yeah.
She has to reject it. She says it's all junk.
Yeah.
You know, and it's true, it is. It's all ephemera, it's material, you know?
Yeah, it's very powerfully, cleverly layered film.
I mean, and again, to aim this film at kids, you know, treating them with sophistication, to understand they'll get it.
Yeah.
You know, I love that. I think that's brilliant. And again, Labyrinth is one of those films where I feel grateful having experienced it when I did.
Same, I watched it as a kid. Used to get it from Video Shop.
Yeah, and I mean, I love it now. I mean, watching it now is just gorgeous.
Same, yeah.
You start to appreciate all these things about it, not only on like a personal level, but on a technical level. What a beautiful film.
The effort that's gone into that, is amazing. Yeah.
Unbelievable. First of all, Jim Henson.
Yeah.
I mean, my God. Jim Henson puppetry is the best in the world. There is nothing like
it. No,
it's
a work of art in itself, isn't it?
Yeah. So is. I mean, the making of it is really interesting. Like, did you know that Michael Jackson was one of the people they considered
Oh
for
God,
the
that'd have
Goblin
aged
King?
well, wouldn't it?
Oh, with him kidnapping kids and whatnot. Yeah,
Yeah.
it would have gone down very well indeed, wouldn't it? But thank God for the decision to have Bowie, eh? Thank
I
God.
heard Sting was also rumoured. That I could have seen that
I
working.
can see that. I can see Sting working. I mean, he's a good actor anyway. He's in a lot of fairly decent stuff,
It's
you
also
know?
got that slightly androgynous look to him back then in
Yeah.
the 80s, and he'd work.
Mm,
And have you heard
yeah.
about the long spoken about sequel for the
To
Labyrinth?
Labyrinth. Well, yeah, it's been like in and out of development hell for
Yes, but they
decades.
spoke about obviously having recasting Jareth,
Mm,
and
mm.
the name that's been floated is Tilda Swinton.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, well, if you're gonna do it, I can't pick
Oh,
better than that. To be honest,
oh,
that works.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's perfect. That is like, yeah. I can see that working.
yeah. I mean, I'd rather they didn't do it at all. But if they're gonna do
Right.
it, then yeah, all right,
I
I can
can
go along with that.
I can see that. I mean, Tilda is one of those actresses, I love her in everything she's in.
Yeah, she's brilliant. She's brilliant, and I honestly, you could. Jareth is that sort of character where you could see him just switching his gender just for the hell of
Oh
it.
yeah. Well, it probably wouldn't mean anything to him, would it? Just for the lark of it, for the fun. Yeah, I can see him just like like that,
Yeah,
just
I
clicking his
mean,
fingers.
you don't
Just
even know that. I mean, chances are that's not even what he really looks like because
no.
he's the king of the goblins. Why would he look like a human?
Mm,
He's probably
yeah,
some
and
hideous
also,
thing in his
well,
real form,
yeah,
you know?
and he shapeshifts all the
Of
way
course he
through.
does, yeah.
I mean, he turns into an owl all the
Yeah.
time, So that seems to be a thing. The owl is a big thing, isn't it? I love it at the end when he's halfway between the owl and himself.
Yes.
And the feathers are kind of, it's so cool. It's so cool. He's always got a different outfit, like in every bloody scene.
Yeah, he does, yeah.
Different outfit in every scene.
Yeah.
His wardrobe is magnificent.
Yeah, it is, yeah. It's great.
It's just magnificent. You know what the worst of it is, though? Nobody can pull it off like him.
No. No,
Nobody
I
can pull
looked
it off like
ridiculous. I'm
him.
aware that I looked
Yeah.
ridiculous when I did it for a costume party, but when we were doing 80s party, there was no one else I
Yeah.
wanted to go at.
I would love to try it. I would love to give it a go, but I just know it wouldn't
No,
work.
it just looks
I
like
haven't.
he's having a laugh. You can't. He
Right.
looks deadly serious and brilliant in it, but anyone else just looks like it's a bit of a joke,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, hate it, don't you? I mean, there is another film which has a similar vein, which is often considered to be like the sister film to Labyrinth from the same era, which is The Dark Crystal.
Oh yeah, I was going to mention that. Yeah, that's got a very similar tone in some ways with yeah,
Very dark.
yeah.
Very dark fantasy. I mean, it's not dark in the same way. It is much more a fantasy film, this one. So it's set in a fictional world, a fictional universe
Entirely
with fictional
fictional. Yeah, it doesn't
creatures,
have humans and stuff. Yeah,
No, it's more like a fairy tale or a classic fantasy. It's a quest-based mythological fantasy. But boy, is it got darkness in it. Like the Skeksis.
oh yeah,
Oh my God, are they dark?
yeah.
Like the
Again,
whole
it's puppets, but it's not cutesy sort of.
no, it's Jim Henson puppetry, so it is like they're grotesque, aren't they?
Yeah,
There's something really creepy and ancient and withered about them.
yeah.
And like at the very beginning of the film, the whole tone is really grim.
And the story's
Like,
quite complex. The mythology.
yeah. So it opens on like this crawl where it talks about how this world is sustained by this one artifact, which is the Dark Crystal. And at some point in its history, the crystal shattered and gave birth to the darkness in all the realm. And these creatures, these twisted gangrel things, the Skeksis, are the keepers of the shattered crystal. And they rule over this wasteland, this expanding wasteland, which is slowly corrupting everything. It's very cool, and the only way they sustain themselves, these homunculus ancients, is by draining the vital essence of other entities, of other creatures.
Yeah,
It's pretty vile.
yeah. It's yeah. They're like these hideous, twisted, bird-looking, cancerous
Yeah,
things, and it's yeah. There's nothing
they're
sort of
nasty.
comical about them.
No, they are bar none my favorite Jim Henson creations. every single one of the Skeksis, there are 13 lords, I think, of the Skeksis, and each one is an individual.
Yeah.
They're all characters, and they're all named in the credits. They're all named. They're like there's the Chamberlain, there's the Gartham Keeper. The Gartham are like the soldiers of the Skeksis. They're often what people remember from the film because they're so scary.
Sure. Yeah.
The Gartham are these weird, chittering, spidery beetle crab things. And when they emerge, they come out of like holes in the Skeksis castle, and they've got like spidery legs and these glowing eyes, and they make this horrible chittering sound. They're very, very frightening indeed.
Yeah, that element though runs through all of these films of having stuff in them that's legitimately scary.
Right, that scares adults, that is
Yeah,
still kind of
I
creepy,
don't think there's much going on in kids' films now that 20 years from now kids will be talking about. Do you remember that scary thing in that Pixar film?
I doubt it. Sadly, I mean, do you know where it began? Do you know where it became de rigueur to not where it started to bleed away the theme or the tradition of having scary elements in
No.
children's films? It was Aladdin.
Was that the
Now,
first one? Because Disney films themselves used to have it, didn't they? Like
they did.
Pinocchio,
I
for
mean,
instance, and
now, even Aladdin itself has elements of it, but after Aladdin, it started to bleed away. Aladdin is one of those weird films. I love the film. I think it's a really well-made Disney film, but it started a particular tradition and trend in not just Disney films, but children's films across the board that has sustained to this day, and it fucks me off something rotten. It really does. It's the trend of having a traditional fairy tale, but which is ironic and which has like the wisecracking postmodern referencing character
right,
in it.
yeah, yeah, sure,
You after Aladdin, because Aladdin was so popular, it was so profitable that every children's film after follows the same formula,
sure,
right up to the present day.
yeah,
Right up to the present day, it became impossible to tell an earnest fairy tale, for
yeah. Because you
example.
even get Frozen, and then you've got the snowman in it.
Hmm.
If
Right.
you take him out of it, it'd be perfectly
Hmm.
earnest, and yeah, but he's there in it, so
Even one of the darkest Disney films ever made, and it is legitimately one of the darkest, The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
yeah,
Now, I've looked into the background of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and the initial idea was that they wanted to actually do away with that Aladdin formula. The people who were creating the film, they wanted to go uber super dark with it, and they wanted it to be this very bleak, resonant children's film, and that's what they made, and you can see that in the film. But just before it was due for release, the execs looked at it,
yeah.
obviously, and they were like, no, you need to throw in some silly characters, you need to throw in some jokes, and you need to throw in more songs. So you've got this film that's a film of two halves.
Yeah.
The dark stuff is the darkest stuff you'll ever find in a Disney film. It's amazing. It's absolutely brilliant. You've got
There's a
Judge
whole
Claude
song
Frollo.
with the priest having a go at the woman because he wants to shag her. There's a whole song
Hellfire,
about that, isn't
yeah.
there?
Judge Claude Frollo, yeah. He, played by Tony J, he has this song which is infamous because you watch it and you're like, this is a Disney film?
Yeah.
Fucking hell. He is singing in his dark chambers before this roaring fire, and he's in this state of religious distress because he is like this fundamentalist Puritan.
Yeah.
He basically believes himself to be absolutely pure and perfect, and he's trying to wage this war against the licentious elements of Paris. But he's met the gypsy Esmeralda at
Yeah.
that point, and unfortunately he hasn't fallen in love with her. Nothing so pure as that he's lusting after her, and he sees, like in the Disney film, the fire forms this very licentious dancing form of Esmeralda that's dancing in almost like a pole dance kind of way. And he pulls out this scarf that he took from her and he's kind of like rubbing it around his face. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh my God!
Yeah.
Oh
It's a
my
very
God!
strange choice of Disney song, isn't it?
This is a Disney film that deals with sexual repression, a Disney villain that's actually motivated. Like, he actually has the best motivation of almost any Disney character, any Disney villain ever, because it's not just, oh, I'm so evil. He is a religious fanatic,
Yeah.
he is a Puritan, and he is sexually
He could be
frustrated.
a real person.
Right,
And I don't
right.
think you get that with a lot of Disney villains.
Well, with most Disney villains, they're just evil because they're evil because they're
Yeah.
evil because they're evil, aren't they? And sometimes that works. Don't get me
Oh,
wrong.
it
I
does.
kind of
It's
like that,
brilliant.
you
That's
know.
how you get Ursula. But I
Oh
mean,
yeah, Ursula's fantastic. I love her. I love Ursula to bits. She's so much fun. But to have a complex villain with motivation in a Disney film is really interesting.
yeah, I mean, I always found a character to be who I find to be massively disturbing. Again, this goes back to the thing I said about the autism and being able to see through people. Is Gaston.
Gaston's a great
He's a
example.
massively disturbing character, and the fact that
He's
everyone loves him.
yeah,
How could you not see that this guy's a rapey prick?
yeah, he's a great example because again, he actually is quite a complex villain underneath it all. He's a narcissist, isn't
Yeah,
he? He's a
he's
pure
yeah,
narcissist.
but he's a real person.
Yeah,
You know, you're not going to
he
get
is
Ursula or Hades or Scar, but
right.
this is a real person. This we've met
Yeah.
people like him. We all have.
He's the jock.
Yeah, he is
He's the jock who is allowed to get away with anything because he's
because he's
privileged,
good
he's
at
born,
sports. He's
because
yeah,
he's handsome, he's good at sports. What I love about Gaston is what he represents as well. Now, the Beauty and the Beast came directly after The Little Mermaid, and if you look, Beauty and the Beast is a giant self-parody for Disney. It takes everything that's in The Little Mermaid and inverts it.
yeah,
So in The Little Mermaid, you've got this, quite frankly, slightly ditzy Ariel
yeah,
who falls in love with the first human she sees, the
yeah,
first man she sees, doesn't know him, and gives up everything for him, surrenders everything about herself for him. And that's promoted as the romantic thing.
yeah.
Beauty and the Beast inverts that completely.
Because he can
And
offer
it,
her everything and she don't want it,
right,
and yeah, it's
right.
yeah,
And Belle is this self-propelled woman who knows what she wants and sees through Gaston completely.
yeah.
Sees through him completely, finds him boring, finds him boorish, brainless. And if you look at Gaston and look at the animation model for Prince Eric
He's the same.
from,
He's very
it's the
similar.
same.
Gaston would have
They,
been the
yeah,
hero in most earlier Disney films.
that's it. That's exactly it. He is the parody of Prince Charming. He is the inversion of it, and I love that.
Yeah,
I love
I've
it.
always thought he was like the worst Disney villain, to be honest.
He's great. I mean, and also loads of fun.
Oh, he's
He's a
fun because he knows exactly what he is. But
he's such a dick.
yeah,
He's such a complete bastard, and you kind of love him for it. That song where he's singing, about himself,
yeah.
great fun. Love it to bits. I love it.
So I didn't realise that there was quite as clear a marker there. Then that Aladdin.
Mm.
I know we're going to do another podcast about more modern children's films,
Oh
aren't we?
yeah,
So I don't want to move too
yeah.
far into that territory. But
Aladdin began the trend
that's
basically
interesting.
because it was so popular,
Yeah,
everyone started copying the formula.
that makes
And
sense. Yeah,
since then, it's almost been impossible to tell a straight fairy tale or a story in children's media, popular children's media, that doesn't have these wisecracking postmodern references, And it does irk me, it really does, especially with films like Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is half of an
yeah.
amazing piece of
It's so
animation.
close, isn't it?
It's
You
so close,
know,
but then you've got the studio execs'
of
fingers
course
all
you do.
over
Of
it.
course you do. You always got to insert stuff, and I always think
Mm,
when I've watched Frozen, I think that with the snowman every time
yeah,
that's the studio exec decision.
yep, yeah. I mean, you've even got it in like things like Tangled, for example, which is
Yeah,
Rapunzel, and that's a great film as well. That's actually a really
yeah,
good
it is.
Disney film,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
again, great villain.
Oh
Ah,
yeah, very much. But I think that
Mother
whenever there's
Gothel.
like the little jokey, silly Orko from
Hmm.
He-Man sort of character, I always
Yep,
think that's the executive's handprints
yep.
there.
That's exactly it. Basically, that's like it's the corporations who don't believe that children can understand sophistication. They need like the jangling keys in front of them all the time. They need the silly
That's
wisecracking
why
character.
Robin was created in Batman.
Yep.
because they didn't think kids could relate to this dark, brutal vigilant doing his own thing. He's got to have a jokey kid sidekick. And they even give Captain America one. That's what Bucky was. You say
Bucky.
Bucky now, people think of Sebastian Stan with his metal arm and stuff, which is a modern reinterpretation of him in the comics. But the original version of Bucky was basically Robin in a slightly different outfit.
But it's ironic, isn't it, that down the ages, both of these characters have become the sources of some of the darkest material in those comics.
But it's a way of I think that's the way of later writers being saddled with this sidekick thing and saying, let's do something good with that.
Definitely true. Definitely.
Because what they've said with even before you get to the Winter Soldier stuff, what they did with Bucky is said that the purpose of having a teenage sidekick is that he would be doing the really dark Black Ops stuff.
Yeah.
So while Captain America's there, like, don't worry, citizens, Captain America's here, Bucky would be slitting Nazi throats and that kind of thing in the background because people wouldn't expect it. That's what he was.
Yeah. So he's basically the one who's doing kind of the real stuff, the stuff that matters.
Captain America's out the front punching the Nazi in the camera. Meanwhile, Bucky's behind locking them all in the house and setting fire to it. That's what Bucky was, and that's how they redid him in the modern writing, which is great. But that is very much a response to the fact that at some point in history, some network guys who aren't involved with the creative process have forcibly said you've got to have this jokey little side character in it.
I mean, 1980s cartoons were sons of bitches for this.
Oh yeah.
There was always the Orko,
Snarf in things, Slimer in Ghostbusters.
Although I will give a pass to Slimer in Ghostbusters, because one of the things they did with Slimer often in Ghostbusters is actually made him part of the pathos.
Yeah, he was more valid, but he still does kind of fit into that category.
He's definitely that character. Yeah, he is. He's totally that character. Transformers, ironically, had the human characters for that.
Yeah.
It's pervasive. It's absolutely pervasive. I mean, one we've talked about before, talking about children's films that are kind of dark. Transformers the movie.
Yes, very, very
kind of dark. Well, it starts with an apocalypse, so
it starts with, is Megatron actually being effective? So, like in the first 35 seconds, well, no, it starts with the Unicron destroying the planet.
Yeah,
but
he
then
destroys Lithone. Yeah,
the first scene you see Megatron in, he kills about 5 Transformers, and he's
right.
Okay.
Traumatic.
Traumatic. I mean, they've done a He-Man cartoon movie, and you get to see Skeletor just like butchering half at Masters. That'd have been quite.
Wouldn't that be great? I really do. I mean, the comics do it. The comics kind of go there, But I would love to see. I mean, the one that came closest to that kind of thing was the 2002 He-Man cartoon. He's pretty badass in that.
He is in the DC comics did a run of He-Man comics in the like about 2010 or something, which I'm gonna have to send them you at some point. I keep forgetting to do it.
I've still got to send you 2000 AD.
Yes,
I've got to get those books out.
But they're great because they kind of redo it all as like it should have been with the adult element to it and everything. And there's a great scene in this where Skeletor comes to the palace to see Rando, who's his brother. And the Masters, He-Man isn't there. The rest of the Masters, so you got Man-at-Arms, Mossman, Stratos, but all of them come to fight Skeletor, and he just kicks the shit out of all of them, effortlessly on his own.
That's the way he should be.
And the only one who he doesn't is Duncan, who's Man-at-Arms.
Well, Man-at-Arms,
when Skeletor was a little boy growing up in the palace, Man-at-Arms was like the only member of the royal household as a young soldier who was kind to him. Because all the others were racist because he's from this race called the Gar, which is why he's got blue skin.
Yes.
And all the others.
He's illegitimate, isn't he? He's kind of like
son of the king. Yeah. And he and Man-at-Arms was always nice to him, and he remembers that.
Yeah.
So when he's slaughtering all the Masters and Duncan stood there with his gun, he literally says to him, "Please don't make me hurt you, Duncan."
That's very
it's
cool.
really a lot. He's like, and it's just seeing him cut through them all effortlessly. It was just like, where was this on the series?
Right. I mean, I love Skeletor in the original 1980 series. He's such a doofus, isn't he?
But yeah, we spoke about that before. But just having an
Yeah.
effective Skeletor would be great. So on the
Hmm.
Transformers movie, you finally got an effective Megatron,
Oh yeah. Oh my God, didn't you? He was
and
badass.
that was
He,
brilliant.
yeah, having like because they're allowed to actually kill one another
Yeah,
in the film, which they weren't really in the show. So you got some pretty heavy scenes,
oh yeah.
characters dying left, right, and center. Obviously the big one, oh spoiler alert, Optimus Prime gets killed.
But
Don't
even
worry, he comes
before
back.
that, it's like Ironhide cops it and Bumblebee
Mm,
cops it and
yeah, like yeah, Prowl, all the
Jazz.
ones you
Yeah.
knew, they get pretty badly destroyed, you know.
Speaking of tragic deaths, though, in kids' films, what about Never Ending Story?
Oh my God. That's actually a really good example. Again, this air of like decay and
Yeah.
darkness that starts right off. Like the notion of the nothing is
Yeah.
so cool.
It's like a Lovecraftian sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but also again very complex because of course Fantasia is the realm of human fantasy as we learn, and because like postmodern culture is destroying children's ability to imagine.
Yeah, of course
It's
it is.
destroying Fantasia. That's what the nothing is. It's not like a villain. It's the emptiness. It's the absence of imagination.
Yeah, but ironically, in a film,
In a film, yeah, yeah.
which people would have been complaining about videos at that point, just like it was
Mm,
later, it was video games, and
yeah, yeah, it's true. It's
yeah,
true. But it's a beautiful notion, and the way it manifests is great. I love it when it manifests and it's like tearing up bits of Fantasia, and bits of Fantasia are falling away, and
yeah,
there's that notion of like an apocalypse happening. It's like,
yeah.
whoa,
And
it's
it's already in
scary.
full swing as the film takes place.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's a wonderful sort of fantasy with a great aesthetic, and
Yeah.
each of the set pieces is scary and despairing and unpleasant. So you've got like, I mean, the one everybody bloody remembers is the Swamps of Eternal
Oh
Sadness,
God, the horse.
obviously.
I have like a running
Everybody.
joke with a good friend of mine where I periodically just send her a gif of that, and she just responds like, "Stop fucking sending me this."
That's triggering as well. That's mean.
It's one of her favourite films, but she's always sad at
Mm.
that bit, so I just like to send it her.
Everybody gets it at that, but it's
It's
terrible. It's
awful
awful.
because it's prolonged
Yeah.
as well. It's not like a
Mm.
quick death, like the horse is
No.
gone. Like he turns around and horse is gone. It's like trying to drag it
No.
out, and it's
Yeah. It's a moment of genuine darkness, and there are moments in that film though, like the tension, the horror tension. When he tries to when Atreyu tries to pass through the first of the gates,
yeah,
between the sphinxes. It's really unpleasant, isn't it? Like him and Engerbuk, the little scientist guy, are watching through a telescope, and this knight tries to go through, and these sphinxes blast him with these eye beams. And when Atreyu reaches the fallen knight and his visor goes up, the corpse inside is all charred,
oh
and
yeah. It's like
it's like,
it's
whoa.
like a full on. Like the corpse driving the taxi on Ghostbusters, they
Mm.
just go full on with it, don't they? They don't.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
they do. I mean, again, it's got themes that are very like Labyrinths, where it is like this much younger child trying to come to terms with elements of himself.
yeah,
And that's very cool as well, because obviously Fantasia is part of him because it's part of everyone. So he has power over it, he has effect over it.
sure.
Um, and that's very cool. I like that element very, very much. It's about a child realizing his own capacities. Because he's a very kind of like Bastian is a very kind of frightened boy, isn't he?
Yes.
He's a very anxious, frightened, very postmodern boy. He doesn't really know where he is. He doesn't really know what his place is or what his purpose is, and that's what he's kind of exploring with Atreyu, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It's that's kind of you need that sort of character to drive that story, though.
Mm.
I don't think
Yeah,
it'd work
totally.
quite so well with a self-assured sort of.
No, it
Yeah.
really wouldn't. And of course, I mean, the kind of kid he is the kind of kid who would like the film because we are that kid, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
All of us
Yeah.
bookish, young, sort of fantasy obsessed kids, we were that kid, you know. All of us were that kid. There are some that sequence towards the end where Atreyu comes across Gamork, the wolf.
Yeah.
That's a horror sequence and a half.
Yeah, well, just blatantly. Yeah. Just
A blatant,
yeah.
framed like a horror sequence. It even has like an orchestra sting. When Atreyu is basically questing to try and find a cure for the nothing, an answer to the nothing, he comes across like this ancient ruinous civilization, and painted on the walls are murals of his quest. Everything that he's done up to that point is
Yes.
recorded on the walls, and he comes to one that he hasn't lived yet. And it depicts these eyes, these glowing eyes in darkness, and when he turns around, it's there.
Yeah.
It's this wolf thing called Gamork, who is not what he appears to be. He's basically like a servant of the nothing. It's a really creepy, weird moment. The way the wolf is framed is disturbing, and the
I'm
wolf
trying to
is
picture him. I can't quite picture him. Did he have glowing
he's
eyes?
yeah, like glowing
Yeah.
green eyes, all scarred and bitten. It's like the puppet is really unpleasant. It's got like bits of it missing, and it's sharp
That's a good
teeth and
idea. Yeah.
nasty piece of
Because
work
a
is what it
servant
is.
of something that basically that is decay, you would expect it to
Mm,
look a bit decrepit in itself,
that's
wouldn't you?
it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he explains as well. Gamork talks, so he explains to Atreyu. He's sort of like, "I am the servant of the nothing, and I was sent to hunt the only one who could stop it. But I lost him in the swamps of sadness," and that's when you realize, oh, he's hunting Atreyu. Oh shit, you know.
Yeah.
Um, it's really cool. It's a great sequence. Unfortunately, because of technical limitations and because of the budget constraints, they didn't really pay it off, you know. So that he does sort of launch himself at Atreyu when he realizes who he is, but Atreyu just stabs him and he dies. It's sort of like, oh well,
Yeah, get rid of this quickly. Yeah.
they couldn't really give you a because it was kind of the puppet looks great in darkness, but having it grappling like with a I mean the Lord of the Rings this is not
No, of
they
course.
couldn't have it grappling with Atreyu. It just would have looked silly.
Yeah, I think
So
some things you have to like have the limitations of seeing it in shadow or
mhm,
hidden
yeah,
slightly in water or something like that, because the minute you get it fully revealed, it doesn't work.
totally, you're absolutely right. I mean it's really sad, that film as well. Like I mean directly after that sequence you've got the rock biter, the giant made out of stone, and he has this really sad sequence where he's talking to Atreyu, and he says, "I couldn't hold on to them, my little friends," that he meets at the beginning of the film. The nothing takes them,
Yeah.
and he says, "I will wait here and let the nothing take me." It's so sad.
Yeah, there's like genuine sadness in it, and it lets
Mhm.
you feel it. It doesn't
Yeah.
just yeah. It's and that I kind of think is missing a lot in sort of more modern sort of like your Disney
Mhm.
films, where they'll have a sad bit. Like the classic example of this is the Lion King with Mufasa's dies,
Mhm.
and then 5 minutes
Mhm.
later it's Hakuna Matata time, and it's
Yeah. Yeah.
they don't let you feel it. The only one that does is have you watched The Good Dinosaur?
Good dinosaur.
It kind of
No,
came and went, and people didn't notice it. But I would
I
recommend
don't.
seeking it out.
Yeah.
We can talk about it more on the next one if you watch it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's about like it's dinosaurs that talk basically, but
Okay.
the kind of at one point in the film, I'll not spoil it if you're going to watch it, but at one point in the
Mhm.
film, something really sad happens,
Right.
but they don't cut away from it. The next scene is basically quite a lengthy, silent sequence with
Mhm.
no dialogue of this
Right.
character kind of walking home after this event. And
Mhm.
it just and with the music and the scenery and the complete lack of dialogue, it just makes you feel it. You don't
Mhm.
get to quickly jump away from it and distract yourself with a funny song. It,
it allows its audience to experience it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it was. I remember that film coming out, and a lot of newspaper articles and stuff about it saying it was too sad and too dark and stuff. But
Did these people ever see the films of Don Bluth in the 1980s?
probably not. But this is,
Because, that guy was the past master at injecting darkness and sadness into his children's films, I'm telling you. An American Tail.
Oh yeah, very much. Yeah, I remember those films always having kind of an air of
Always.
sadness to them. Like,
Like An American Tail, it's the separation of Fievel and his family. So the whole film is about this young immigrant to the US who gets
but
separated from
even
his
like the
family.
color palette to it had
Yeah.
this like drained, slightly
hmm
sad feel to it, didn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's got this like brown, grey, dirty
Yeah, it
feeling
does.
to
It
it,
does.
where
Yeah,
everything is privation, everything is despair, and that's an underlying theme as well. Like all of the mice are basically metaphors for immigrants
of
to
course
Ellis
they are.
Island, to the
Yeah,
USA, and they are from Russia, so they have this Russian accent, and everywhere they go, they are in need. They are like poor.
yeah.
They don't have much food. It's really quite cool. So on top of this like very small family story about a child being separated from his family, you have this wider, slightly political dimension. What's really cool is the mice are actually operating alongside the human beings who are coming to Ellis Island. So you actually see sequences where the actual immigrants who came to Ellis Island are there.
Yes, yes, you do. It's not like a purely anthropomorphic world, is it? This is, yeah,
No, it's really not. And there's also this underlying darkness where like it's puncturing holes in the promise of America.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course it is.
So
Yeah,
in when they're in Russia at the beginning of the film, they are constantly assaulted by cats,
yeah,
basically, who are kind of like metaphors for Bolsheviks, for like the oppressive upper classes. So they go to America under the promise that in America there are no cats. They believe this. They actually believe this because that's the promise
that's the
that's been
clever
sold to
metaphor
them.
in it.
When they get there, what they find is that there most certainly are cats, and they're just as bad as the ones in Russia. But the ones in America, there's this character who's basically the villain of the piece, who is called Warranty Rat, right? And he promises the mice everything. He promises them like, oh, homes, family, jobs, all this sort of thing. He's a cat.
Yeah.
He's a small cat who dresses up as a rat to sort of lure the mice.
Yeah.
There's a lot of politics
Oh, it's
in,
very, very, yeah, very
you
clearly. I
know,
always thought that since watching it as an adult, that it's the Bible American Tail one is very sort of like a clear analogy for an immigrant's journey to America sort of thing, and
totally.
America
And
seen through
it's
the eyes of someone who isn't rich and middle class, and yeah,
right. It's really cool that that is in the. I mean, it is a very much a children's film, so Fievel's very cute, and there are musical numbers, and it's funny, but it is also very dark and very sad, and it has these moments of grand despair, but it also has subtext, so it's great. It's a wonderful film. The other one that everyone remembers for its sadness is The Land Before Time.
oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yes, of course, yeah,
What
yeah,
a dark film.
yeah, it is, yeah.
What a dark film. No musical numbers.
No, not at
It's
all. No.
it's about the end. So it's the herds of dinosaurs basically, and the event, the cataclysm that ultimately results in their extinction is happening.
Yeah,
So you get this fracturing of the land and the herds are scattered all over. There's these great sequences in it of like the land erupting and shattering and cracking, and death happens quite a lot in this
but
film.
in the background of your mind, you know that there is no happy ending to this.
Nope.
Because even if they get out of the events of this particular story, you know
Right.
where this is going.
Yeah, yeah. There is a kind of acknowledgement that this is a reprieve at best.
Yeah.
There's no getting away from this. And then there's the more intimate stuff as well. So the film follows Littlefoot, who is a very young
Oh
diplodocus,
God,
isn't
when
he?
his mum dies, oh, and then he sees
His
that shadow. He
mum.
sees his own shadow, doesn't he? And he thinks it's his mum.
Oh, it's
That's
so
awful. That's just
sad.
traumatizing.
There is a T-Rex in this film that they call Sharptooth, and boy is he
Yeah, he
scary.
is a really good. I kind of think they accentuate how he looks in
Hmm.
contrast to how cute the little kid dinosaurs are, because it's
Totally.
almost like seeing it through the kid's eyes, isn't it?
Yeah, he's a monster.
Yes,
He's a
exactly. Yeah.
proper monster. And I love the way they do the fight between him and Littlefoot's mother, because you see it in silhouette.
Yes.
You see it in shadow, but if you watch those shadows, the T-Rex is tearing chunks out of
Yeah.
her. It's ripping her apart. It's so nasty. It's brutal.
Have you seen the Dinosaurs TV series?
Oh
Do you
yeah.
remember the last episode of
Oh.
that?
Oh my God.
So
What the
so
fuck was
bleak, isn't it?
that?
Our friend and guest on here, Rebecca Lambert, she that was one of her favourite series as a kid, but she never watched the last
Yeah.
episode.
Right. Right.
But it's on Disney Plus now, so I told her to watch it, and she messaged me. And she was like,
I
"What the hell was that?"
what the yeah, that is a what the fuck moment because like the rest of the show isn't like that.
No, the rest of the episode series is just like an average run of the mill sort of primetime sitcom. It just happens to be about dinosaurs. You know, it's about like the
Exactly
boss is
that.
coming to dinner. What will we cook him? And
Yep.
then they have to, you know, it's that kind of thing. And then
Yep.
suddenly the meteorite strike happens, and the whole
And
world starts
it's
freezing, and it's getting
and it's
colder, and you know,
and the baby at the end says like, "What are we gonna do?"
yeah.
And the dad says, "I don't know."
Yeah, they literally sat round, huddled up round the fireplace. They've all got
Yeah.
blankets on because it's snowing and it's not going to stop snowing. And the weather forecast
Right.
says there's snow forecast every day for the next month. We've got no idea when this is stopping. And the baby's like, "What's happening? What's going on, Dad? Why is it so snowy?" And the dad's just like, "Oh, we'll be okay. We'll be all right." And then the camera just sort of fades out, and you're like,
It's like
"Jesus, this is
what?
yeah." It's
Yeah, it's
really,
like
really sad. It's like,
it has this like gut punch
yeah.
like feeling to it, doesn't it? And it's like, where did that come from?
Well, it came from the fact that the series got cancelled. So but they got cancelled halfway through the series. So the writers
Right.
knew. So they were like, "We're going to do a big fuck you ending." Yeah.
Brilliant. It kind of
And
works,
it's
you know.
brilliant, but really
Yeah.
shocking. You do not see that coming at all.
If you don't know beforehand, and it's a real shocker. It's a
It's like the
genuine
last
shocker.
episode of The Simpsons ending with Homer dying or something, and not in a
Yeah.
comical way, but he gets cancer and he's laid in his sickbed in
Like,
hospital, and the family's
yeah.
there with him or something. It's just a really brutal, cold sort of death.
Hmm.
You just wouldn't see that coming at all.
Yeah, it's a very, very peculiar thing because it's so tonally different from everything that's come before. And that's a very good way of injecting a note of darkness into something. Obviously, doing something completely incongruous with what you've done before.
Yeah. Now this isn't like a sad sort of one, but in terms of like injecting some stuff that is very different to what's come before. If you think about the Gremlins films, which is
Ah,
sort of,
yeah,
you could argue they're kids' films. I suppose you could make that
I
argument.
suppose. But the first one is definitely horror. It's got
Yeah,
like
that's what I mean. The second
real.
one's vastly different to the first one.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the
I
second one.
love
I
them
love it to
both, but
bits.
it's just
It's.
I remember seeing the second one first as a kid
Mhm.
because I had it
Yeah,
on video, and that very much felt like a kids' film. But then when I watched
yeah.
the first one, it didn't seem like it
No.
was, and it's strange to have that in the
It
same franchise.
is, isn't it? For like a franchise to be successful and then to completely change itself.
Yeah, that was
I
weird.
mean,
That was a strange
that
decision.
that almost never happens because, of course, those in charge won't let it
No, you just
happen.
have more of the same.
But it actually works really well. I've got to say. I mean, I love the first Gremlins. It's a great film. It's this really dark but very funny horror film.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
It's
It's
gross.
part of that
It's
era of like the small scary thing, like your
yeah,
critters and that sort of
yeah.
thing.
That's exactly it. Yeah, it plays on a very peculiar kind of fear, doesn't it? And what I always remember from the Gremlins films more than anything is how gross like the birthing scenes are.
Yeah, they really do. I mean, in the second film in particular, with the better budget, the effects on that, the
Yeah.
balls, the kind of the boils on the back, which had the little, you can even
Uh,
see the little gremlins moving about
yeah.
inside them, and yeah,
It's great fun. I love it. I love it to bits. And of course, you've got all the mutant gremlins in the second one as
they
well.
are. I know this. They are only there because Sam Winston, who made the first ones, only
Uh,
agreed to come back and do the second one if he could get creative because he got bored
ha!
of making like 10 of the same
Ha!
thing. So he's like, if I can pick about a bit and do some, let's have a spider one, let's have a bat one, let's
Yeah.
have whatever, then he'd come back and do it, which he let him. And
Well,
the result is some of the best like puppetry
it's
stuff you've ever
great.
seen.
Yeah, I mean, I love Mohawk, the spider one.
Yeah, he looks amazing when he comes out as a spider.
He's yeah, that's the most horrific sequence in that film, isn't it? He's
Yeah.
quite scary, you know. You've got the female gremlin,
Gosh, yeah.
who's brilliant. The socialite gremlin, who I really love. He's brilliant. The intelligent gremlin.
He's basically Fraser Crane as a gremlin.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, was that civilized? I
Yeah.
love his accent. I love his accent. The way he talks is great. You've got the lightning gremlin, the electricity
Yeah,
gremlin.
that was a very 80s effect, wasn't it? It
Totally,
looks very
yeah.
80s, but it's still good. It still looks good.
I
But
like it.
the
Yeah, it
strange
kind of
thing about
fits
the
with the
second
film. Yeah.
Gremlins film is that it's very aware that it's a film, which is really
Yeah.
weird.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, to the point whereby the gremlins actually get it. I mean, it breaks the fourth wall, doesn't it? You
Yeah.
know, they actually get into the projector and start fucking about with it. You know, which
Yeah.
is great
I think
fun.
that was the first film I ever saw that did that.
That broke the fourth wall. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Where it's
that
kind of
actually addressed the
that
audience.
actually addresses it, kind of like warps the reality of what you can do in a film, where it's like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, we know this is a film, and it's yeah, that was interesting. I've never seen that done before.
It's a very hard thing to do right. You've got to be in like it's got to be the right kind of film to
Yeah,
do it. Because if it's not, then it does have the tendency of just breaking your immersion, doesn't it?
I don't like it in the Deadpool films.
Nah.
I don't like
Nah.
it. I mean, I don't think either the character or Ryan Reynolds is as funny as they think it is.
Hmm.
But and I don't think Deadpool's as cool as they think he is. He's one of those
Right.
characters who was kind of pushed on us in the 2000s, and now the
Yeah.
correct answer is that they're awesome, but they're actually kind of dull. I think the same thing about Harley Quinn, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean my big problem with Deadpool is that he's marketed as being like the anti-superhero, and he's really not. He's actually not as much,
That's what I
not as
was going to say. If
strong,
you watch
you
the
know.
Deadpool movies, they basically are still generic
Yeah.
superhero movies, except
Hmm.
occasionally he'll turn to the camera and make a joke.
Yeah, that's it, and he'll swear. You know,
Yeah.
that's basically it. You know, that is basically it. They're just not strong enough as parodies of
Do you
superhero
know what I
films.
liked though, which ties in with the kind of films we're talking about, is that my nephew and a few of his friends, I remember hearing them talk about that film and
Hmm.
desperately wanting to see it when it came out
Hmm.
because it was like for people their sort of age, which were about 9 or 10 at that point,
Yeah.
it was like that naughty film, which it was
Yeah.
superheroes, but they were swearing in it and they were sexing it.
Right.
And I found that really exciting because I didn't know that still happened. Where
Yeah.
like what we had as kids, where there'd be a film that you'd want to try and get a copy of it off an older
Right.
friend and watch it, and stuff that
Hmm.
you probably shouldn't quite be watching, but it was all right. And
Yeah.
I didn't know that was still a thing for kids, what with the
Yeah.
easy access they have to everything. So I thought that was really quite cool to hear him talking about that.
That is quite cool, isn't it? That
Yeah.
is quite cool. I like that. I mean, it just on a tangent, it just leapt into my mind. There are ch children's films that have dark edges. The Studio Ghibli films.
Yes, yeah, of course. If you want to go like outside of the Western sphere, you probably
Right.
find more of them now, I think.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, they have these wonderful dark edges in the same way that fairy tales do, for the most part.
Yeah.
A Spirited Away is, oh God, what a film. Uh, that is like for me possibly top five greatest films ever made. It's a beautiful sort of Japanese Alice in Wonderland, I suppose.
Okay.
And the darkness in it derives from not only the imagery, which is surreal to the nth degree. It's really strange. There's a bathhouse in it for spirits and gods.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
so
nice
cool.
creative concept, though, isn't it?
What a one! And all the gods and spirits that attend it are all different. They're all like principalities of different elements in the world. So there are river gods, and there are ocean gods, and there are air gods, and they're all derived from sort of traditional Japanese Shintoism and whatnot. Just gorgeous. But like a lot of these films that we're discussing, a lot of the darkness is more thematic. So it involves this girl called Chihiro, and Chihiro is this thoroughly postmodern child at the beginning of the film. She is this kind of slightly sluggish, bored with everything girl who
Sure.
doesn't really want to do anything, and is kind of dropped into this world almost by accident. And suddenly she has to pick herself up. Suddenly she has to use her own initiative. Suddenly she's in this kind of scary, threatening world. And it's a kind of growing up story. It's about her mastering herself and coming to learn herself.
That's a
It's really
relatable
lovely.
character, though,
Yep,
as
totally
opposed to
is.
the wunderkind who can immediately do anything, you know?
Totally. Well, you find this in Studio Ghibli. I mean, this is a Japanese thing. A lot of the characters are on the they are not like the great heroes. They are not the great swordsmen or whatever. They're just people who kind of stumble
Stumble
into
into
the
these weird
story,
events. Yeah, I prefer that. I do like that because it's
I mean,
relatable.
yeah, it totally is. I mean, the Studio Ghibli children's films are second to none. They're second to none. The sophistication of them, the beauty of
It's
them.
treating your audience with a level of respect as well, isn't it? And
Yeah,
just expecting
yep,
that they're going to get this. And you know
yeah,
what? I
and
also remember, in regards, I bet they do it, but in regards to some of the films we spoke about, I remember
mhm,
not fully getting some of it as a kid.
yeah.
And I
Oh
think that was
yeah,
okay too.
yeah, totally. I mean, it makes you come back, doesn't it? I
Exactly.
think a lot of the time as well, it's not even that you don't get it, you kind of perceive it, but on a subconscious level, and you can't articulate it to yourself.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So you've got that inkling that there's something here of depth that is drawing you, but you don't quite understand until later.
Yes, exactly that. Yeah. It challenges you is a way of putting it. So like mentally
Yeah.
challenges you a bit.
Yeah, totally. I'm all for that. Sophistication in children's media. Because children are sophisticated. They're way more sophisticated than most of culture will allow
Yeah,
for.
they can handle more than you think they can.
Well, yeah, of course they can.
Yeah.
Of course they can. Um, and in many, many, many different arenas as well. More than most people expect. I think a lot of it comes from the fact that most people just forget. They forget what it's actually like to be a child.
No, it seems like people. I mean, culture kind of does this to you. It kind of pushes you to get away from being a kid as quickly as possible to become an
Yeah.
adult and a consumer and stuff. And I think
hmm
it's only in the last few years that we've kind of started appreciating again actually the value of staying being a kid for a bit longer.
Well,
You
also
know?
this how synthetic that division is.
Yeah.
How contrived. Because you know what? Inside, even the most sophisticated, the most apparently adult of us, we're still the frightened little child inside. We
Did I
are.
tell you the quote that I love from Rufus Hound, the comedian slash actor?
What's that?
It's my absolute favorite example of the exact thing you've just said.
hmm
He said that I've listened to him on quite a few podcasts. He's a really clever and interesting guy.
Yeah.
But he says, when my wife got pregnant for the first time, I was terrified because I'm
Yep.
thinking, I don't know how to be a dad. I don't know any of this.
hmm
I'm an idiot. I'm just,
Yeah.
And he said, I contacted this guy who had been very important to me during my time at boarding school, and he was the old headmaster. He's still alive, but he's much
hmm
older now. And he's like always a proper, straight talking, educated sort of fella. So I went to speak to
Yep.
him again, and he's
hmm
about 80 at this point. So I
Yeah.
told him these fears and everything I was afraid of him. And he says, this guy, he looked at me and he says, I served for 10 years in the armed forces and saw combat
hmm
overseas in multiple wars.
Yep.
I've had children and grandchildren. I've personally overseen the education of hundreds of boys and who became men. And then
hmm
I've been the head teacher of 7 different private schools. I've lived in
Yep.
4 countries and I've done all of this. But can I tell you a secret? I'm actually 11 and I want to play with my toy robots.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
love that. That is
Yep.
so, just that realization that, oh, everybody's like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody's faking it.
And I love the fact that we are now approaching like a cultural state, certainly like with our generation, where we're kind of acknowledging it and owning
Yes,
it.
I like that. I do
Yeah.
like that. The fact that people come to my house and see that in the room I'm sat in now, my office room,
Mhm.
it's like wall to wall toys and collectibles in my
Yeah.
office,
Yeah.
and their reaction to that would be, "That's awesome."
That's awesome.
That's what
That's
people
superb, you know?
think.
Yeah.
Because you know what, I have a professional career.
Hmm.
I drive. I'm an adult. I do pay my
Hmm.
mortgage. I do everything I'm
Hmm.
supposed to do.
Yeah.
Why can't I have this too?
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. Why can't you have it too? If it sincerely brings you pleasure, what's the problem?
Yeah, and but
You know?
you used to kind of have that like that Abe Lincoln quote of "It's time to put away childish things." You used to have that thing of
Mm,
right, you're 15 now, toys away, comic books
mm,
away. You can only be interested in football and cars.
hmm.
You know, particularly for men, that was a kind of an aspect of
Right.
toxic masculinity,
It's
wasn't it? In that you had to
yeah,
have this
totally. And what has it resulted in? I mean, I do sometimes look at like our dad's generation of
just a
men.
lot of joylessness, isn't there?
Yes, there so is a lot of joyless grey men who don't relate to themselves in very sincere
They don't
terms.
even know what they like. They don't have a
No, they
thing
haven't.
that they're passionate about because
No.
they've never been allowed it. It was taken away from them the minute they
Yeah,
went to the first job.
that's it. Yeah, that is absolutely it. It was ridiculed out of them,
Yeah,
you know?
and I
And
often
it's
think that
very
about
sad.
people. Not so much my own dad because he's always been good at kind of holding on to the things that
Hmm.
he loves, which is
Yeah,
helps me
my dad
relate to
too.
him as an adult really,
Yeah,
really
my
well. I
dad
must.
too.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
But a lot of people who he's friends with, I often think, I wonder if he would have been like a massive science fiction fan, or I wonder if
Hmm.
that guy would have been a really good poet, or I wonder if.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? If these people have been allowed to be
Yeah.
something other than generic man,
Yeah.
what might they
I
have had that was a passion of theirs or
well,
something?
I I run into them all the time. You know, there's quite a lot of that particular generation of men around where I live, and whenever I talk to them, what the impression I always get is that they're frustrated in a way they can't articulate.
Yeah.
They are kind of sad.
Yes, that's a
There-
good way of
There's
putting it. Yeah.
there's something in them that is lost and slightly unfound, like it's broken, and they can't quite figure it out. They don't know why, because they've done what they were told to do,
Yeah.
and it hasn't worked. It hasn't
Yeah.
made them happy,
This is
you
what you're
know?
supposed to do, and it'll be the key to happiness. And they did it, and it
Right.
wasn't, and they kind of wished they'd
Hmm.
held on to things. And I think that leads to some of the resentment that you get from that
Yeah.
generation. And when they see
Oh,
people like
totally.
us who still keep our toys and that kind of thing,
Hmm.
metaphorically and literally,
Yeah.
and the resentful because they didn't do that, and that resentment
I.
comes out in a form of sort of
Yeah.
mockery.
Yes, I also think it's why you get amongst our generation a fundamental rejection of those prescriptions,
Yeah.
which is very pervasive. It's because we grew up with it. We saw what that lifestyle does to people, and we're like, I don't want that.
Yeah, I'm not doing that when I turn into
I'm not
an
doing that.
adult. I'm not
Yeah,
getting
right,
yeah all the things that make me
right,
happy,
yeah.
and yeah,
I
why
think
can't
that's
I go to work
absolutely
and then come
true.
home and read Batman comics? Why can't I do that?
And I do think as a result of that, there is this intergenerational conflict that occurs where we don't necessarily understand one another. There is a bit of a gulf that happens where we can't communicate effectively between one another because the assumptions are so different.
Do you think that's going to improve then? Because like you've got generations now where like people our age are raising
Well,
kids and they're still into the same stuff as them, so they're watching Marvel movies and they love Marvel movies and they're playing video
just
games and they're playing video games.
yeah,
And
I think just by the natural state of things, the natural progression of time, the fact that those generations will and are dying off now. You
yeah,
know, there will be less people who operate under those assumptions just by that alone. Yeah, I think it probably will. I think it probably will. Um, and I find that fascinating.
yeah, it's almost like a moment in time. Like for a while,
Mm,
that was viewed as correct, but when you actually
right.
view of it in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that long a period, was it?
Not really. Not really, no. And also, when you look at it objectively, what has it actually produced? Anything good? Not
No, a
really.
generation of miserable people who drink a lot.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
largely,
yeah. And
largely it.
I've lost men, I've lost men, and I find that really sad.
Yeah, it
I
is.
find
Yeah,
that very, very upsetting. Because like yourself, I can't help but wonder who would you have been
yeah,
if you were allowed to be who you could have been. Who would you have been?
yeah.
You know?
I think if you've been given the opportunity to express yourself differently and to like the things you'd have
Yeah.
liked, what might the world now have in it that it doesn't
Right.
because you didn't create it, or
Yes,
that kind of
yeah.
thing.
What would have been the unique shape of your imagination? Because all imaginations are unique.
Yeah,
Um, and would you have been a happier person for it?
yeah.
You
And
know?
would that have made you a better dad to people, your kids,
Mm,
or would
hmm Yeah, I find that remarkably sad. I really do. Um, because very often I find that these men can't articulate why they're unhappy.
No, that's why it gets it ends up lashing out at
As
people who, yeah, of
scapegoating,
course, yeah,
racism, all that kind of thing, other generations, and so on and so forth. Yeah, yeah, it's absolutely true. Because they can't articulate it. It's too big.
no, it's too
It's
big. But I think the fact that we have held on to those things from his
hmm
childhood, and that not only will we remember stuff like we've been doing on this podcast, but we will actually
yeah,
quite happily go back and watch those films and still enjoy them.
totally.
Just something as simple as the fact that I can go after this podcast now and watch a Disney film if I want and not feel the
Yeah,
slightest bit weird about it. Can you imagine
right.
people from our dad's generation on their own watching a Disney movie
I,
age 35?
I really can't.
They wouldn't do it. They'd
I
have felt like it
really
was wrong
can't.
somehow.
Yeah, they'd have felt guilt about it,
Yeah,
wouldn't they?
guilt, that's a good word. Yeah. But why? What
And
bullshit is that?
shame. Yeah, what utter bullshit is that? I mean, it derives from their fathers and from their fathers and from their fathers, doesn't it? Ultimately.
Yeah.
It is the very epitome of what we call toxic masculinity.
That is something I have a big problem understanding with regards to my autism is toxic masculinity,
Yeah.
because one of the things I
hmm
struggle with is, and this is something I've wrote quite lengthy posts about and had a good response to, is
hmm
rules for the sake of rules. Shit that
Yes.
people do just because they do it, and you can't get
Yeah.
an answer to it. The example I typified this with is a fictional one, but when I wrote this article about it, I called it "On Wednesdays We Wear Pink," which is the thing from
Yep.
Mean Girls, which is, oh,
hmm
we all wear pink on Wednesdays, and Lindsay Lohan's
Yep.
character's like, why? And the only
Why?
answer she
Yeah.
gets is, that's what we do. It's like, that's not an
That's what.
answer.
Yeah.
And so much toxic masculinity is that. This
Yep.
is what men
Yep.
do. Why is it? Because it
It's
is.
even worse. I mean, in a way, it's even worse because the toxic things, the toxic behaviors and mindsets that have been inculcated into them are actually
Oh,
self-harming.
yeah. Yeah.
They're self-mutilating. They make them unhappy, but they still cling to them. They
Yeah.
still like exonerate them as being the definition of what manhood and masculinity is. They're not only false for the most part, like that whole masculine bullshit of the alpha.
Oh, yeah.
It's bullshit in zoological terms.
Yeah.
The guy who actually came up with the notion of the alpha and the beta and all of that system disavowed it years ago.
Yeah.
He came out and said, actually, our studies were based on captive wolves and didn't really factor into how they work in the wild, and it's
The
completely wrong.
cooperative society wolves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and fluid. So the ones that lead the packs change.
Yeah.
There's not just one, and it's certainly not the strongest. It's completely different. It doesn't work like that.
No, it's more socialist. They kind of rest
Right.
ones who have been doing it a couple of days and put them towards
hmm
the back of the pack. And
Yeah.
it's not all this kind of
But
Ayn Rand sort of bullshit. No,
oh
it's none
God.
of that. It's none of that at all.
I mean, even if it were true, it would have no application for human beings.
No. It's such a. What is that? You get that with the anti-mask people. Like, oh, I'm a wolf.
hmm
Really?
No,
What do
no,
you
you're
even
not.
mean by that?
Right, right, yeah. You are, yeah, it's pathetic. It's empty people. It's people who don't have any sense of identity, haven't been allowed to develop any sense of genuine identity, who are just clinging to anything, you know, any avenue that will provide them a synthetic sense of identity. Oh, I'm a rebel. No, you're not.
Yeah,
No, you're
yeah,
not.
but I think that kind of thing, the evidence, the green shoots in like upcoming generations and people who are now
Mm,
becoming fathers and stuff from our generation and even
yeah.
the one just before, which would suggest that that might be dying out. This idea of
Yeah.
abandoning all the things that made you happy and being
Oh, I
miserable
think
as a
so.
result of it. And even
Oh.
the death of things that used to be like wired in, as in you must have
Mm,
this, like the pub that all men go to and get drunk. The
yeah.
fact that things like
Yeah.
that are dying off, it's seen as a bad thing, but I kind of think, is it?
Is it really? I mean, how many murders, impromptu murders occur because of that? How many examples of violence, how many examples of alcoholism? You
This
know,
place where men have to go to escape their lives every night
right.
with other men. It's
Right.
like, is it bad that that's no longer needed?
Yeah, isn't that symptomatic of a social sickness?
Yeah,
You
it's like
know?
the fact that people don't seem to need that as much anymore. Isn't that kind of
Right.
good?
That's a good thing. Fuck pubs. If that,
Yeah,
fuck them.
you
It's
know,
that's
it's a strange thing that people like lament the loss of something that was a symbol of
Mm,
negativity.
yeah, that's a symptom of sickness. Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
yeah, it's. I do think there are some green shoots there, and I think that's good. And I think the wealth of podcasts talking about stuff from the childhood and embracing it and
Mm,
celebrating it and talking about films like what we do and stuff, I think
yeah,
that is all good. And I think that is all
yeah.
good signs. And if we're moving past this point of accepting that, you know what, maybe his parents got some things wrong, and that's always a good point
Yes,
to come to.
absolutely. I totally agree. And I mean, it kind of refers back to what we were talking about earlier. You can acknowledge that previous generations did things wrong.
Yeah,
You can acknowledge that your parents did things wrong because they did.
yeah,
Every parent does things wrong. Every parent operates under faulty assumptions or acts in a moment of impulsiveness or impatience and does something wrong. You can't help it because you're human.
yeah.
You can acknowledge that, and they don't have to be bad guys. They don't have to be like abusive. They don't have to be terrible
They
people.
are doing the
That's
best
not
they
it.
can with the tools that they were
Right,
given, just like
right.
everybody else does in any situation.
It's okay to acknowledge that, it's not always the case that they were good parents. That's fine, because
Yeah,
it's true. It's just true. It's a fact of existence. And but to still, regard the good, that's
yes,
fine.
you can say I don't like the way that my dad tried to talk me out of being a dancer,
Right,
but he were a good dad, and you know what I
right.
mean. You can
And
have a
taking
nuance like
that,
that.
right, taking that as a lesson for yourself, if as and when you become a parent, right, I'm not going to do this.
Yes,
I'm
yeah,
not going to do this with my child. But there is a problem in British culture with ancestor worship.
oh
There
yeah,
really is,
yeah,
where people are unwilling to acknowledge that their parents did things wrong.
yes.
You know?
That comes a lot
Uh,
of this thing of like when someone's died, you can't say all bad about them, and I think
yeah,
what is that? If you were a dickhead the
yeah,
week before you died, you're still a
right,
dickhead the week
exactly.
after.
You're
It's
still a dickhead. Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. I mean, the most recent example of that was Bill O'Reilly.
yeah,
I had loads of people on my feed saying, "Oh, you can't. Oh, it's going to get ghoulish around here." No, the man was an evil, polluting prick who just pumped the most vile, viscous sludge into culture.
yeah.
That he did nothing good. The man did nothing good, and humanity is objectively better for him not being there.
Sure, you can't just pretend that that isn't true just because he's dead.
Yeah, right. So, like, in the 1980s, the fucker used to run a segment on his radio show where he would jokingly list off the names of gay guys who died of AIDS over the soundtrack of We'll Never Love This Way Again.
Yeah, what is that? How can you possibly, as a human being, think that's funny?
Right, right. And how dare anyone come to me and say, "Oh, you shouldn't really say that. Oh, you're being ghoulish."
Nah, nah,
Fuck you.
nah. That's ridiculous. No, no.
Fuck you, you know?
Yeah, yeah. But that kind of deifying people just because they
Hmm.
died,
Yeah.
then makes it
humanizing
impossible to
them,
criticize.
like humanizing them, because they're dead when they were just objectively evil.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
was no good in them at all. That's disgusting. That's what I find disgusting, the dishonesty of it.
Yeah, I don't. That's something else I struggle with. Is I can't. Where you're just supposed to. Oh, we're not
Mm.
supposed to talk about the fact that he did that. I think,
Mm.
but why? Why? Because he's dead. Yeah, but it doesn't
I'm
change the
really
facts.
No, I'm really sorry. There are people that humanity is better off when they're gone.
Yeah,
It's just true because they're not doing the bad things they were doing anymore.
yeah, they're not there contributing to the
You know,
contributing to the evil of it. Did you watch the
yeah.
second season of Jessica Jones on Netflix?
I didn't know.
Because it's only a very brief point, but it's interesting. Is that there was this character on it who was a mutant who had this power
Mm.
to sense undeniably whether or not someone was evil,
Oh wow,
and
interesting.
he was steering this vigilant towards killing them, basically.
Hmm.
And he said, and it raised a very interesting moral conundrum about vigilantisms and stuff, which is that he said,
Mm.
look, I can tell you, you can prove this under a microscope with you can get Tony Stark's technology to look at
Uh-huh.
I can show you on a genetic level in how the world feels, because I feel it as a psychic. I'm a genuine psychic. I'm a mutant. I'm
Hmm.
not some faker. The world is genuinely feels better when these people die. He
Right.
said there is like an energy that runs through everybody and
Hmm.
connects all of us. And it's like if you imagine it as being light on one end and black on the other, every
Yeah.
time one of these people is killed, it gets lighter.
Yeah.
And
Interesting, eh?
that's a really interesting philosophical concept, isn't it?
It really is because I mean, as the lefty kind of liberal guy I am, it does make me uncomfortable. It makes me really uncomfortable, but it's a really interesting moral conundrum.
But this idea that all human life is equally valid, people said that.
It's not.
But
It's
like you
bullshit.
ask anybody, and you don't even need to answer this, right? But if you
Hmm.
said to someone, right, I'm going to give you a gun with one
Hmm.
bullet in it, and you have to use it. There's no way out of it. It's
Hmm.
not a riddle, and you can either shoot this 7-time convicted paedophile or
Hmm.
this nurse. Who are you going to shoot?
Right. Yeah.
Is there
It's not
anybody who
true.
hasn't immediately said the same answer in the head?
Right. Right.
This
Yeah.
idea that everyone's equally no. Everyone thinks that there are
Hmm.
some people the world were better off without. So to immediately sort of sanctify these people the week after they've gone and
The
just
week after
forgive
they're dead.
everything,
Yeah. Yeah.
it doesn't work. And I think that is part of this culture of refusing to accept that maybe your parents made mistakes or your grandparents made mistakes
Yes.
and all of that, because now you feel
Hmm.
like you shouldn't be saying that because they're not here, and
Right.
it creates this kind of toxic culture where, because of that, if you can't acknowledge that it was a mistake, then you can't improve
Hmm.
on it.
You can't learn from it, yeah. And also, it breeds this kind of repression, doesn't it? Where you feel bottled up, like you can't say this or you can't say that, which is never any good.
No, no, because you can't change the behaviour if you can't
Hmm.
acknowledge that. Yeah, grandma was lovely, but she were a massive racist. So
Absolutely, yeah. Or like, oh, I mean, my parents didn't. My parents are actually pretty good in this regard. But oh yeah, my parents loved me, but they did use violence occasionally. They did hit me occasionally.
I never had
Mine
that either, but
didn't. No, I
I
didn't.
know
But
friends the same age as me whose parents were
yeah.
very quick with the slipper and
I
that
mean,
kind of thing.
that's the big one for me because ultimately, no matter how you frame that, you're actively arguing for violence against children. It doesn't matter how you frame it, that's the bottom
Yeah,
line.
yeah.
That's the bottom line. And you're only doing it, I'm sorry, the only reason anyone does it is because they can.
Do you see that? I can't remember, but do you see that in a lot of films? I'm just talking about with
What, like,
regards to like normalizing things like parents smacking the kids and stuff. I know you get
it
like
from.
cartoon violence, like Homer
Mm,
strangling Bart and stuff, but
yeah.
you wouldn't even get that if it was made as a new cartoon.
No, no, of course. I don't know. I can't think of any instances off the top of my head.
I can't, and that makes you think, doesn't it? Because you think
Hmm.
if it was deemed like slightly uncomfortable to have this
Mm,
adult actor seen to be hitting this child
mm,
actor, what's that tell you about?
yeah. There's almost something subconsciously coming out in the media, isn't there,
Yeah,
there? It's very interesting, very interesting. But no, I will never be at home with arguments for hitting children. Never. I mean, it's fundamentally wrong.
yeah,
You know,
obviously, yeah, yeah.
it's fundamentally wrong. Um, and it's never, my biggest problem with it is that the people who had it happen to them, or who do it, who did it when they raised their children, find it very difficult to talk about, I find, without getting defensive,
Yeah.
because they feel as though it's attacking them,
Mm.
which in a way it is. In a way it is, because they did do something wrong. I mean, the big argument you get, which is one we've discussed before, which I absolutely hate, is it never did me any harm.
Oh,
You're not in a position to say whether it did you any
no,
harm.
you don't know because you don't know what you'd be like if that hadn't happened.
Right, none of us are. None of us are in that position. So, yeah. And that opens up a can of worms when they say that. 'Cause it's like, oh, well, okay, let's examine your life and look at what you're actually like and
Yeah.
whatnot. But, and also your anecdotal experience is not
No,
good, good
no,
enough.
it's not. No.
All of the studies, and they are unambiguous. Every single one says the same thing. Children who are hit or subjected to violence, even if it's minor violence like the slipper or whatever, they always have heightened anxiety and mental problems
Do you
when
know
they're
what I
older.
find interesting is
Always.
that I can remember my grandma, British grandma,
Hmm.
because one of them was German. My British grandma telling me stories about the time her mum would hit her for something,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
this is when she was about 70. She could specifically describe the
Hmm.
incidents of when
Yeah.
she'd been hit and what for and everything.
Yep.
I can't remember. I never got hit as a kid. I get shouted at and
Hmm.
stuff or
Hmm.
sent to my room. I
Yeah.
can't remember any specifics about that. I can't remember
No.
specifics about why I might have got sent to my room or why I might have got shouted at because it happened, I was punished, I accepted it, and I moved on. The fact
Hmm.
that she can specifically remember at that age
Yep.
what her mum had hit her for and everything suggests some sort of lasting scar there.
Doesn't it? Doesn't it just? Yeah, it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And very often, I mean, it's so insidious, people don't realize that it's left that scar, because it's normalized. It's just
Yeah,
normalized. And also, they love their mum, they love their parents, so
it's a very conflicting set of emotions, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, that someone can be a source of love and affection and safety and also of threat,
Mm,
or of fear is a difficult thing. But it's bizarre how normalized that is,
yes.
in our psyches and in culture. Because ultimately it is just an argument for hitting children. It's ultimately just an argument for violence against children, no matter how you frame it, no matter what you use to justify it,
Yeah.
you know?
Oh, yeah, that's what it comes down
That's
to.
that's the bottom line. That's the brass tacks. Um, and there's no real way of arguing against that.
It's a strange argument to try and defend, isn't it? It's a strange
Yeah,
thing
but
to try and
they
defend.
do, and they will. They'll use every circuitous thing in the book, and there's no good argument for it.
No, of course there isn't.
There's no good argument. It's ultimately self-justifying, because it's never for the child. It's not for their benefit. No matter
It's just
what you
easier for
tell
you, isn't
yourself,
it, in that moment?
it's for you. And don't get me wrong, very often the hitting it comes as a result of a spur of the moment shock, like if a child is going towards a plug or something and you're frightened and that
Yeah.
the emotion gets the better of you. That's usually it, and then the self-justification comes in after.
Yes. That
you know
doesn't seem as bad to me as planned discipline,
no,
like at
no.
schools,
Yeah, oh, that's
where it's like
disgusting.
I'm
I mean,
going to hit
that's
you later,
yeah.
and then you're going to come back to this
mm,
office, and then I'm going to hit you.
mm,
Like that isn't just a spur of the moment, lost your patience and smacked them thing. This is a
no, that's
planned. You're planning to physically
concentrated.
abuse a kid.
Yeah, it's concentrated cruelty. And I mean, I've spoken to so many people of the generations who grew up when spanking was a thing. Those teachers were fucking
I bet they
sadists.
were. Yeah.
They did it just because they were cruel and they were monsters. They were just
You'd have
monsters,
to be to
that's
do
the
that.
truth
It's
of
not
it.
just a spur of the moment shit. I've smacked my kid. I didn't
No.
mean to do that. It's like I'm going to right at 3 o'clock today. This kid's going to come to my
Mm,
office who's not even my child, and I'm
yeah.
going to hit them with something.
Yeah, they were monsters. They really were. I remember my granddad telling me a story about a teacher who hit him so hard once that he couldn't sit down when he got home,
Oh God.
and my great granddad went and beat the shit out of the teacher, and he never
Justified.
did it again.
Justified.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is justified. It is justified. Someone assaulted your child.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
it's that. Why was that ever seen as being all right? I don't get that.
why is it still seen as all right by certain demographics? You
Yeah,
know,
but they're dying out. It comes back to what you
they
said
are.
before. They're dying out.
Yeah, it's true.
The
It is
average
true.
age of
It is
people who
true.
think that is over 60.
Yeah, it's true. They are dying out, and well,
Time
you
only
know,
moves one way, and their
yeah,
values are going to go to grave with them.
yeah,
So
it's true. It's so sad though, isn't it? That like again, you've got these generations of people so broken that they will justify,
they'll
violence against
justify when an
themselves,
adult
and
used to hit them.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And they even tell themselves, "Oh, it was the best time of my life." No, it wasn't.
no,
No, it wasn't. You've just distorted it in your memory.
romanticized it as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, because that's what we do. I mean, it's very difficult for us not to do it. We look back at like the 80s and the 90s and we try to romanticize it to certain degrees, but we were children. you know,
everything.
it's
No, I've always said this. Like, my default answer to what was your favorite decade is the 80s. But
mm,
what I mean by that is the pop culture. I like the
yeah,
toys, I like the cartoons, I like the
yeah,
films, I like the music.
mhm,
But I was like a child.
right,
I am very much aware that if I had been an adult in the north
hmm
of England in the 80s, it would have
yeah,
been awful.
yeah.
I am
Well,
aware of that.
I could have been dead by
Yes, of
now.
course you could. Yeah.
You know, I mean, less than a decade. If I were less than a decade older, I could have got caught up in, you know, the
Yeah.
whole the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah. It's I think people you have to be careful with the nostalgia because I love the stuff
Yeah.
that came out of that decade
Yep.
that I enjoyed as a child, but as
Hmm.
an adult, that same decade would have been awful.
Yeah. Totally true. Totally true. There, but for the grace of God.
Yes, yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. And don't get me wrong, for some of the kids I knew it was horrific,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
all of us know households that were, for whatever reason, it was bad.
Yeah, the worst one for me was I've mentioned him before, but I had a friend who was slightly older than me, and I used to sort
Yeah.
of see older films through him. But
Hmm.
what was really, and I didn't even notice this till I was older, is that
Hmm.
what was really strange and negative is how he seemed to be living a different life to his younger sisters. Like if
Yeah.
you just saw him, he was like like the Nelson Muntz sort of
Sort
person,
of the latchkey kid,
latchkey
yeah.
kid. But his sisters were very sort of like new clothes, new toys, clean, everything. And what it was is because he had been the child from her first marriage, which fell
Oh.
apart and ended badly. She then got with someone else and had another couple of kids. And she now
Oh.
wanted the perfect middle class, cozy life with them. And he was kind of apart from that. So
Oh, that's
they would
terrible.
go out and have nice family days out and stuff and literally leave him at home and
Hmm.
things like that at like 8 years old. They would be
That
getting new
is.
clothes and toys and stuff, and he wouldn't. And it was really like he seemed from like if you just saw him, you would expect to
Mm,
follow him home to some really rough
yeah.
council estate or something.
Yeah.
But actually, they lived in a nice semi-detached house on a nice
Mm,
leafy middle class street.
yeah.
And it was that. It was because he was pretty much unwanted, if you like, in the sense that
Yeah.
he was representative of a life she'd left behind her, but he was still there. So, you know,
Yeah. It's awful. I remember when I was a kid, we had like family friends who lived nearby, and I don't know what the deal was, but the mother, and she was like she was her biological mother and everything. The mother hated the older daughter.
right, okay.
Don't know why. We never figured it out. We just do not know why. But she would belittle her. She would talk to her like shit in public. And the little brat of a younger daughter was coddled and given
Yeah, yeah,
presents, and
yeah,
she was a nasty little bitch. Not her fault that she was made
yeah.
that way, because that's the dynamic. She was a nasty piece of work. She was. I mean, it's like, wow. Looking back on it, obviously as a kid, you just don't. You don't question as such, do you? You know what I mean? It's just the way things are. But looking back on it now, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
If I saw that in my current capacity, I'd call
Of
my
course you
friends in
would.
social services.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the happy ending with the friend that I had
Mhm.
is that he is now a counsellor and he works with underprivileged kids.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So he took his
He took that,
difficulty
turned
and
it around, and made it into a
yeah,
this ain't happening to other people if I can help it
yeah,
sort of thing.
brilliant, brilliant. I mean, what is the best thing you can do with pain and trauma? That use it to help other people.
Well, that is one of my favourite quotes from Doctor Who when it was Peter Capaldi,
Mm,
where he's talking
yeah.
about the Time War and he says, "Do you know what you do with that pain when you've been through something like
Hmm.
that? Is you say you hold it tight and say no one else will have to feel like this if I can
Yeah,
stop it."
yeah.
And you think, yes,
Oh,
that is such a good response to having
yep.
gone through something like that.
Yeah, well, it's the best response, isn't it?
And but so
I
yeah, I mean,
can't
I must
think
admit,
of.
I don't know him anymore. He's not in my life, but
Hmm.
my mum is like friends with people who do still know him, and
Yeah,
that's what he's doing now. And I thought
that's
that's
superb.
great. That's really great.
Yeah, that is absolutely superb. What a lovely thing, what a
Yeah,
brilliant thing. Um, but wow, that I think that Lex, that went to some places,
yeah, all relevant though, all tied back
didn't
to
it?
the the
Yeah.
different things that were different back in the 80s and
Wow.
stuff. Yeah,
That one went to some places, but then again, it's what we were talking about earlier. That's what I like about these podcasts, I've got to
yes,
say.
so do I. It's not just reading a Wikipedia. If you want to go onto Wikipedia and Google
Mm,
80s kids films, you can read that if you want.
go for it. Go
But
for it, my
that's
loves.
that's not interesting to me.
No, 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 not at all. And with that, I think we can draw it to a
Yeah,
close, if that's all right with you. Lex, anything to pimp out at the moment?
yeah. My most recent book, "Whistling Past the Graveyard," a
Mm-hmm.
collection of short ghost stories and stuff, is on Kindle and paperback, available in all the usual book type places.
Yep. All the usual book type places. I like that.
Well, I was going to say bookshops, but I'm like, well, Amazon's
Yeah.
not a bookshop, is it? And you
Right,
can get
right.
it
Yeah,
from
you're
good
right.
bookshops as well. So it's
Uh, Brilliant. Links below, by the way, ladies and gents, to everything we talk about here. Oh,
I'm
Lex.
here. Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry. I thought I'd lost you. I thought
No,
I'd
no, the
lost you for a
sound went
moment there.
crackly for a minute, but I'm
Sorry.
still
I
here. No.
thought I'd lost you for a moment. As for myself, it's the usual. My loves find me around here on the Exaggerated Elegy channel, playing Resi 3 at the moment. By the
Oh,
way, Lex.
nice, nice.
So bloody good.
Yeah,
So
I
good.
really enjoyed that one.
Um, You can also find links to all my published fiction over at strangeplaygrounds.com. There will be a new one coming relatively soon from Perpetual Motion Machine Publications. And you can come and chat to me over at Enigmatic Elegy on Twitter if you fancy it. Right. Thanks, Lex. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
That was a blast. That was a blast. It was
Yeah,
so good.
enjoyed that.
Thank you guys for listening, and until next time. Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.